"Get your hands off me! I paid for this seat." The young girl's voice cracked with fear and disbelief as the flight attendant gripped her arm, attempting to forcibly remove her from first class. The cabin fell silent, passengers frozen in shock as the 13-year-old's grandmother rose to her feet, her voice deadly calm amidst the chaos. "You will regret putting your hands on my granddaughter." Those 9 words weren't delivered as a threat, but as a certainty, a promise that would shake not just this flight, but the entire airline industry to its core. What the arrogant pilot and his compliant crew didn't know was that in exactly 48 hours, the CEO of Skyway Airlines would fly across the country personally to beg forgiveness from the woman they had tried to humiliate. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. To understand the magnitude of what happened on Flight 1187 to Los Angeles, we need to start at the beginning. We need to understand Vivian Bennett, a woman who had spent her entire life fighting to occupy spaces others believed she didn't deserve. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about discrimination at 35,000 feet. It's about power, dignity, and what happens when the wrong woman is told she doesn't belong. Comment below where you're watching from, and if this opener stopped you in your tracks, hit that subscribe button before we continue. This journey is just beginning. Vivian Bennett began her day well before dawn, sipping coffee by the window of her Atlanta home. At 65, she maintained the early riser habits that had built her real estate empire from nothing. Outside, twilight draped the sky as she prepared for their flight to Los Angeles. 40 years ago, she had been a young black woman with ambition in a world determined to diminish her dreams. With only $3,000 saved from working 3 jobs, she purchased her first distressed property, renovated it herself on weekends, and sold it for a modest profit. That single transaction became the cornerstone of Bennett Properties, now valued at over $400 million with investments across commercial real estate and urban development. Success hadn't come without scars. At 24, after closing her first major commercial deal, she walked into the Westview Hotel with confirmation number in hand, ready to celebrate. The clerk looked her up and down, her modest dress apparently contradicting the reservation details. "I think there's been a mistake," he said loudly. "These premium rooms are typically for our executive clients." She showed her ID and credit card. He made a show of checking the system, then claimed all rooms were suddenly booked due to a computer error. She watched as a white couple behind her was promptly given a suite. Rather than make a scene, Vivian left, slept in her car that night, and transformed that humiliation into determination. 10 years later, she bought that hotel, fired the manager, and established the first of many training programs focused on eliminating discriminatory treatment. Never again, she had promised herself. Not to me, and not to anyone else if I can help it. Now Vivian had built more than wealth, she had built influence. Her company's diversity initiatives had become the industry standard, and the Bennett Foundation provided scholarships to underprivileged youth. Most importantly to Vivian, she had created a safe world for her family, especially her granddaughter Zoe. She checked her watch and prepared breakfast. Today's flight would take Zoe to her audition for the National Academy of Dance, an opportunity that could transform the girl's raw talent into a professional career. Taking care of Zoe while her parents served with Médecins Sans Frontières had been Vivian's greatest joy these past 3 years. She thought about their family journey. Her own grandmother had been a domestic worker who wasn't allowed to use the front door of homes where she cleaned. Now her great-granddaughter would attend one of the most prestigious arts programs in the country. "Progress," Vivian whispered, preparing Zoe's favorite fruit bowl. Slow, hard-fought progress. She checked their first-class tickets one more time. Vivian always flew first class, now not as a luxury, but as a deliberate reclaiming of spaces once denied to her. Each time she settled into those seats, it was an affirmation. "I belong here. We belong here." Little did she know that today's flight would test that resolve in ways she couldn't imagine. Grandma, have you seen my blue dance shoes? Zoe Bennett's voice carried down the hallway of Vivian's spacious home as the 13-year-old frantically searched her bedroom. Vivian smiled to herself. Check the dance bag you packed last night, she called back. Left side pocket. A moment of silence followed, then an excited, found them. Zoe bounded into the kitchen dressed in comfortable travel clothes, black leggings, and an Atlanta Dance Academy sweatshirt. Despite the early hour, her eyes sparkled with anticipation, her dark curly hair pulled back into a neat bun. She dropped her dance bag by the door and slid onto a bar stool at the kitchen island. I couldn't sleep at all last night, she confessed, reaching for a strawberry. I kept imagining the audition, then I'd get nervous, then I'd practice my solo in my head, then I'd get excited, then nervous again. She sighed dramatically. It was exhausting. Vivian placed orange juice in front of her, and yet here you are, bright-eyed and ready to take on the day. Do you think Mom and Dad will be able to watch the live stream of the showcase if I make it that far? Zoe asked, her voice softening. Your father already arranged for satellite internet time specifically for that date, Vivian assured her. They wouldn't miss it for the world. Zoe nodded, momentarily quiet. Dr. James Bennett and Dr. Amara Bennett had been stationed in Sudan for 3 years. Their commitment to providing medical care in conflict zones meant long separations from their only daughter, but their dedication had also shaped Zoe's worldview. I miss them, she said simply. I know, sweetheart. They miss you too. Vivian squeezed her granddaughter's hand. But they're incredibly proud of you, as am I. Zoe's bedroom walls told her story posters of dancers from Misty Copeland to Mikhail Baryshnikov covered nearly every inch. Her shelves held trophies from regional competitions, though Zoe valued the photos of herself with her dance troupe more than the awards. Dance had become Zoe's language, her way of processing the world. When she first came to live with Vivian, the separation from her parents had left her withdrawn. It was dance that gradually brought her back, giving her a channel for emotions she couldn't verbalize. On the hardest days, Vivian would find Zoe in the home studio, moving through her grief, her longing, her hope. Grandma Zoe asked, Do you think I'm ready for this audition? Really ready? The question held all the vulnerability of her 13 years. Vivian considered her answer carefully. I think you've done everything possible to prepare. Your technique is exceptional, your dedication is unmatched, and most importantly, when you dance, people feel something. She met her granddaughter's eyes. That can't be taught, Zoe. That comes from in here. She touched her heart. Zoe nodded, absorbing her grandmother's words. But regardless of what happens, Vivian continued, you are already a success in all the ways that truly matter. Remember that. A smile bloomed across Zoe's face, the same radiant smile that had captivated audiences. She hopped off the bar stool and hugged her grandmother. Thank you for everything, she whispered. For taking care of me, for believing in me, for taking me to Los Angeles. Vivian held her close, treasuring the moment. Always, my love. Always. What neither of them knew was that their journey would test them in ways they never anticipated, and that Zoe's greatest performance would not be in a dance studio, but in the courage she would soon need to find at 35,000 feet. Captain Richard Whitfield adjusted his uniform tie in the pilot's lounge mirror, the 4 stripes on his sleeve reflecting his seniority. At 48, his once athletic build had softened, but he still commanded presence in his Skyway Airlines uniform. The creases around his eyes had deepened over 23 years of flying, though lately they seemed more from frustration than laughter. He glanced at his luxury watch, one he could no longer easily afford since the divorce last year. Alimony payments had stretched his captain's salary thin, forcing him to downsize from his suburban home to an apartment. The court-ordered child support for 2 teenagers in private school only compounded his financial stress. Morning Richard called another pilot entering the lounge. You've got the LA route today, right? 7. Whitfield nodded curtly. Yeah. Should be straightforward. Full first class, about 80% in economy. Not bad. Better than my flight to Detroit. Winter storm warning, probable delays. Whitfield barely acknowledged the comment as he gathered his flight materials. His mind was on yesterday's email passed over again for the coveted international routes with higher pay and prestige. The explanation cited concerns about recent passenger interaction scores, but Whitfield knew what it really meant. The airline was changing, prioritizing what he considered performance over experience. The new diversity initiatives meant younger pilots, many of them women and minorities, were getting opportunities he felt entitled to after his years of service. It's all politics now, he muttered to himself as he headed toward the gate. 3 months ago, he'd been formally reprimanded after a complaint from a Hispanic businessman who claimed Whitfield had been dismissive. Whitfield had defended himself vigorously. The passenger had been late boarding, but the airline had sided with the customer. Customer experience is our priority, his supervisor had explained. We need to ensure all passengers feel welcomed and respected. The words still burned. 23 years of safe flights, and they were concerned about a passenger's feelings, approaching gate B14. Whitfield scanned the waiting passengers. Business travelers on laptops, families corralling restless children. Standard mix. Then his gaze landed on a black teenager in a dance academy sweatshirt bouncing excitedly beside an older woman who appeared to be her grandmother. Something about their demeanor caught his attention, a confidence that seemed out of place. He watched as the grandmother checked something on her phone, then whispered to the girl who beamed in response. Whitfield's eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed the boarding passes in their hands. First class. Of course. He felt the familiar tension rise. Another example of how the world was changing, leaving him behind. 20 years ago, first class had a certain profile. There were expectations, standards. Now it seemed anyone could occupy those premium seats, regardless of whether they fit the traditional image. Captain Whitfield. The gate agent interrupted his thoughts. All pre-boarding checks complete. We're ready when you are. He nodded, forcing his attention back to the flight ahead. Thank you. I'll do my walk through and signal when we're ready to board. As he strode down the jet bridge, Whitfield composed himself, pushing down the bitterness that had become his constant companion. He was a professional. He would do his job. But somewhere deep inside, a resentment simmered, one that would soon boil over at 35,000 feet, with consequences beyond his imagination. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport pulsed with morning energy as Vivian and Zoe made their way through security. The efficient click of Vivian's heels contrasted with Zoe's occasional skipping step, her excitement impossible to contain. We have about an hour before boarding, Vivian noted, checking her watch. Breakfast at the lounge. Zoe nodded enthusiastically. As a frequent first-class traveler, Vivian had access to the premium lounge, another space she had deliberately claimed for herself after years of watching such amenities reserved primarily for others. The lounge offered a peaceful respite from the terminal's chaos. While Vivian responded to a few urgent emails, Zoe people-watched, imagining stories for each traveler. The businessman, furiously typing, might be closing a world-changing deal. The woman in yoga pants could be a famous choreographer traveling incognito. 15 minutes until boarding, Vivian announced, gathering their things. Let's head to the gate. At gate B14, the waiting area filled with passengers for flight 1187 to Los Angeles. Vivian and Zoe found seats near the boarding lanes. Zoe pulled out her phone, scrolling through music for her audition piece one more time. I still can't believe we're flying first class, she whispered to her grandmother. Wait until I tell Maya. She's always bragging about her dad's business trips. Vivian smiled. It's nothing to brag about, just a more comfortable way to travel, especially when you need to be rested for an important audition. As they waited, Vivian noticed a pilot standing near the gate desk, his gaze sweeping across the waiting passengers. When his eyes landed on them, something in his expression shifted, a barely perceptible narrowing, a slight tightening of his jaw. Vivian had seen that look countless times throughout her life. It was the look of someone making assumptions, someone who believed they knew exactly who belonged where. She held his gaze steadily, then deliberately offered a polite nod of acknowledgement. The pilot didn't return the gesture, instead turning abruptly to speak with the gate agent. Vivian felt a familiar weight settle in her chest, the burden of other people's prejudice that she had carried all her life. But she had long ago stopped letting it diminish her. Instead, she sat straighter, a queen on her throne. Pre-boarding will begin shortly for Skyway Airlines Flight 1187 to Los Angeles, announced the gate agent. We'll start with our active military personnel passengers needing special assistance and families with children under 2. Zoe bounced slightly in her seat, her enthusiasm uncontainable. I can't wait to see what movies they have. First class and Skyway Elite members. We invite you to board at this time, came the next announcement. Vivian and Zoe gathered their carry-on items and moved toward the priority lane. As they handed their boarding passes to the gate agent, Vivian again felt the pilot's eyes on them. Now, standing just behind the desk, he watched as their first-class boarding passes were scanned. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Bennett," the gate agent said warmly. "And you too, Miss Zoe." "Thank you," Vivian replied, guiding Zoe toward the jet bridge. As they walked past the pilot close enough now to read Captain R. Whitfield on his name badge, Vivian again offered a courteous nod. "Good morning, Captain," she said evenly. "Morning." He responded, the greeting clipped and cold. They continued down the jet bridge, Zoe chattering excitedly about the trip ahead, unaware of the brief exchange. But Vivian had lived long enough to recognize the signs of trouble brewing. She made a mental note to be especially vigilant during this flight. At the aircraft door, they were greeted by a flight attendant with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile. Her name tag read Sophia Rodriguez. "Welcome aboard," Sophia said. "First class is to your right, seats 2A and 2B. "Thank you," Vivian replied, appreciating the genuine welcome. The first-class cabin gleamed with understated luxury, wide leather seats, ample legroom, individual entertainment screens. Zoe's eyes widened as she took it all in. "Grandma, look at all this space," she whispered, sliding into her window seat. Vivian settled beside her, arranging their personal items. "It makes a long flight much more comfortable." Other first-class passengers began boarding, mostly business travelers in designer suits with well-worn expressions of entitlement. A few glanced at Zoe with mild curiosity, unused to seeing a teenager in the premium cabin. Sophia approached with pre-flight beverages. Orange juice for the young lady, she offered, correctly guessing Zoe's preference. "Yes, please," Zoe beamed. "And for you, ma'am, sparkling water would be lovely. Thank you." As Sophia served their drinks, Captain Whitfield boarded the aircraft, followed by another pilot who would be his co-pilot. Whitfield paused briefly at the entrance to first class, his gaze again finding Vivian and Zoe, before he continued to the cockpit without greeting the passengers. The younger pilot, however, offered a friendly "good morning, folks" before following his captain. The contrast wasn't lost on Vivian, but she focused on Zoe, helping her get settled for the flight ahead. Whatever prejudices the captain harbored, they were his burden to carry, not hers. She had long ago learned not to let such things disrupt her peace. But as the final passengers boarded and the cabin door closed, Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would test that resolve in ways she wasn't yet prepared for. The first-class cabin of Flight 1187 settled into pre-departure preparations. Sophia and another flight attendant moved efficiently through the aisle, collecting empty glasses and ensuring seatbelts were fastened. Zoe explored every feature of her seat: the power outlets, the extra-wide armrests, the generous recline function. "Look, Grandma," she whispered excitedly. "The screen has so many movies." Vivian smiled at her enthusiasm. Just remember you were planning to review your audition music during the flight. I know, but maybe just one movie, Zoe pleaded with practiced puppy eyes that had melted Vivian's resolve many times before. Well, see, Vivian replied, the universal grandmother's answer. That was neither yes nor no. Across the aisle in seats 2C and 2D sat a man in his early 40s meticulously dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of old money and influence. His silver cufflinks caught the light as he tapped impatiently on his laptop, ignoring the all electronics must be stowed announcement. His boarding pass identified him as Thomas Lawson. Behind Vivian and Zoe, a woman with perfectly highlighted hair and an Instagram-ready outfit was already documenting her first-class experience. Just settling in for the flight to LA, she narrated quietly to her phone. Skyway's first class is looking fresh today. Her designer luggage and practiced camera angles marked her as someone accustomed to broadcasting her life. Amanda Pearson, as her frequent self-identification in her videos revealed, was apparently some kind of lifestyle influencer. Completing the first-class cabin was a young Hispanic man in seat 3C who wore scrubs under his jacket, likely heading to or from a hospital shift. He had immediately buried himself in a medical textbook highlighter in hand, occasionally making notes in the margins. Miguel Alvarez, as Sophia addressed him when offering a pre-flight beverage, seemed to be a regular on this route. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richard Whitfield, came an announcement over the PA system. We're currently waiting for final clearance from air traffic control and should be departing shortly. Flight time to Los Angeles today is 4 hours and 20 minutes. Flight attendants prepare for departure. The tone was professional, but notably lacking the warmth that usually characterized such announcements. No welcome aboard, or we're glad to have you with us today, just the bare operational essentials. Sophia moved to secure the cabin checking seat belts and tray tables. When she reached Zoe, she smiled warmly. First time in first class, Zoe nodded, beaming. Yes, it's amazing. Well, you're in for a treat. The cookies we serve are worth the ticket price alone. Sophia winked. As the final preparations continued, Captain Whitfield emerged from the cockpit for his pre-flight walkthrough, a standard procedure for many pilots to visually inspect the aircraft before takeoff. He moved with a stiff formality, nodding curtly at passengers without making eye contact. When he reached row 2, he paused. His gaze settled on Zoe, then shifted to Vivian. Is everything to your satisfaction? He asked, his tone suggesting the opposite should be true. Yes, thank you, Captain, Vivian replied evenly. These are premium accommodations, he continued, an odd emphasis on the word premium. Are you sure you're in the right section? The cabin fell suddenly uncomfortably silent. The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Thomas Lawson looked up from his laptop, eyebrows raised. Amanda Pearson's live stream suddenly found a new focus. Miguel Alvarez lowered his textbook slightly. Our boarding passes are for seats 2A and 2B. Vivian replied calmly, her voice betraying none of the indignation she felt. So, yes, Captain Whitfield, we are exactly where we're supposed to be. Zoe shrank slightly in her seat, her earlier excitement dimming as she sensed the tension. Very well, Whitfield said after a pause. Enjoy the flight. He continued his inspection, but the damage was done. As he disappeared back into the cockpit, Sophia approached quickly, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Ms. Bennett, I apologize for that, she said quietly. Can I get you anything before takeoff? We're fine, thank you, Vivian assured her, though her hand had moved instinctively to cover Zoe's, a protective gesture she had employed since her granddaughter was small. From across the aisle, Thomas Lawson cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said, addressing Vivian directly for the first time. That was completely inappropriate. If you'd like, I can... Thank you, Vivian interrupted gently. But it's not necessary. Lawson nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Behind them, Amanda Pearson had switched her live stream to private recording mode, her influencer instincts telling her something newsworthy might be unfolding. As the aircraft began to push back from the gate, Zoe leaned close to her grandmother. "Grandma," she whispered, "why did he ask us that?" "About being in the right section." Vivian met her granddaughters, eyes seeing the confusion there, the dawning understanding of what had just occurred. These were moments she had hoped to shield Zoe from, though she had always known they would come eventually. "Some people make assumptions based on how we look," she explained softly. "They see our skin and make judgments about where we belong. But that's—" Zoe began, her young face clouding with indignation. "I know," Vivian squeezed her hand. "I know, but we don't let their limitations define us. Remember, we know who we are and where we belong." Zoe nodded slowly, processing this. Then, with a resilience that made Vivian's heart swell, she straightened in her seat and reached for her seatbelt. "Well, I belong right here in first class," she declared quietly but firmly. "And I'm going to enjoy every minute of it." Vivian smiled, though a sense of unease lingered. Captain Whitfield's behavior suggested this might be just the opening salvo in what could become a more significant confrontation. She had weathered such storms before, but she worried for Zoe, so young and still finding her voice in such situations. As the engines roared to life and the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway, Vivian made a silent promise to her granddaughter. Whatever happened on this flight, she would protect Zoe not just from harm, but from the soul-diminishing impact of prejudice that she herself had fought against all her life. The powerful thrust of takeoff pressed Vivian and Zoe back into their seats as Flight 1187 climbed steeply into the clear Atlanta sky. Beside her, Zoe watched through the window as the city rapidly shrank beneath them, her earlier enthusiasm somewhat restored by the thrill of ascent. "Look, Grandma." "Everything's getting so small." Vivian leaned over to share the view, grateful for her granddaughter's resilience. Children had a remarkable ability to bounce back to find joy even after uncomfortable moments. Still, she knew Zoe hadn't forgotten the captain's thinly veiled slight. It had merely been temporarily overshadowed by the excitement of takeoff. As the aircraft leveled off and the seatbelt sign dimmed Sophia and another flight attendant, a middle-aged white man, whose name badge read Gregory Palmer, began preparing the first-class cabin for beverage service. The plane's PA system crackled to life once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Whitfield. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather in Los Angeles is clear and we expect an on-time arrival. A reminder that Skyway Airlines maintains certain standards in all cabins, particularly in our premium sections. Flight attendants will now begin service. Please direct any concerns to them rather than attempting to approach the cockpit during flight." Thomas Lawson, still across the aisle, frowned at the announcement. Certain standards he muttered loud enough for Vivian to hear. "What exactly does that mean?" Vivian merely shook her head slightly. The captain's meaning had been clear enough to her, another reminder that he questioned their presence in first class. Sophia approached with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Bennett." "Miss Zoe, what can I get you to drink? Apple juice, please," Zoe requested. "I'll have coffee. Thank you," Vivian added. "Black." Sophia nodded and moved across to take Lawson's order. From the row behind, Amanda Pearson's voice could be heard as she continued her now private recording. So, the captain just made an unusual announcement about maintaining standards in premium cabins. Definitely not the typical welcome message. Keeping an eye on this situation. Vivian pretended not to hear, focusing instead on helping Zoe select music for her headphones. But she was acutely aware of the attention their section was receiving, the subtle shifts in atmosphere since the captain's comments. When Sophia returned with their drinks, she leaned in slightly. "Ms. Bennett, I want to apologize again for the captain's behavior. It's not reflective of Skyway's values." I appreciate that, Sophia Vivian replied quietly. This isn't my first encounter with such attitudes. I'm afraid. Sophia nodded understanding in her eyes. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. As she moved away, the cockpit door opened and Captain Whitfield emerged once again. This in itself was unusual. Pilots typically remained in the cockpit after takeoff, emerging only when necessary. He spoke briefly with Palmer at the galley before making his way down the first-class aisle, ostensibly checking on various systems. When meal service began 30 minutes later, Whitfield reappeared, just as Sophia was taking Vivian and Zoe's selections. "I'll have the pasta, please," Zoe said. "And I'll take the grilled chicken salad," Vivian added. Whitfield, who had positioned himself near the galley, interjected. "The pasta is a children's option typically reserved for our younger travelers in economy," he said. "First-class passengers usually prefer the premium selections." Sophia froze, tablet in hand, clearly uncomfortable. "Actually, Captain, the pasta is available to all passengers in first class. It's listed on our menu." Nevertheless, Whitfield continued. "I think our premium passengers should have first choice. It's a matter of appropriate allocation." The implication was clear. He didn't consider Zoe worthy of first-class service. "I assure you," Captain Vivian said calmly, "we are paying first-class passengers, and my granddaughter is entitled to select any meal offered on the menu." Zoe shrank back slightly in her seat. Her excitement about the special meal now completely evaporated. "Of course," Whitfield replied with a tight smile. "I'm simply trying to maintain the standards our regular premium passengers expect." "I am a regular premium passenger," Vivian countered, her voice still measured but with an unmistakable edge of steel. "Gold elite status for the past 15 years. From across the aisle, Thomas Lawson cleared his throat again. "I believe the captain has more important duties than monitoring meal selections," he said pointedly. "Perhaps the cockpit requires your attention, Captain Whitfield." For a moment, tension crackled in the cabin. Then Whitfield nodded stiffly and returned to the cockpit without another word. Sophia quickly took the remaining meal orders and retreated to the galley where she could be seen in urgent conversation with Palmer. The other flight attendant seemed to be shaking his head, gesturing toward the cockpit. Grandma Zoe whispered, "Why does he keep doing that? Why doesn't he want us here?" Vivian turned to face her granddaughter fully. "Some people carry prejudices deep inside them, Zoe. When they see us in spaces they've traditionally considered their own, it challenges their worldview. But that's their problem, not ours." "But he's the captain," Zoe said, concern etching her young face. "Doesn't that mean he's in charge of everything? Has in charge of flying the plane safely?" Vivian corrected gently. "Not of deciding who deserves to be in which seat. That's determined by the ticket we purchased, nothing more." Zoe nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "What if he keeps being mean? Then we'll handle it with dignity," Vivian assured her. "Just as we always do." From the row behind them, Miguel Alvarez leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm a medical resident at UCLA and I fly this route twice a month. I've never seen Captain Whitfield behave this way before. If you need a witness to any of this, I'm happy to help." Vivian turned to acknowledge him with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Let's hope that won't be necessary." As meal service began, co-pilot James Donnelly emerged from the cockpit, presumably to take his break while the captain handled the controls alone. He paused by Sophia, engaging in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Several times he glanced toward Vivian and Zoe, his expression troubled. Eventually, he approached their row. "Ms. Bennett," he asked quietly, "may I speak with you briefly?" Vivian nodded, and he crouched in the aisle beside her seat. "I want to apologize for what's happening," he said, keeping his voice low. "This isn't standard procedure and it isn't acceptable." I've tried to address it with the captain directly, but he trailed off, the constraints of professional hierarchy evident in his hesitation. I understand, Vivian assured him. And I appreciate your concern. If things escalate, Donnelly continued, please know that not everyone in the crew shares these perspectives. He straightened up, aware that he had already said more than was perhaps professionally wise. As he returned to the cockpit, Vivian noticed Amanda Pearson discreetly tracking the entire interaction on her phone. The situation was clearly building toward something, gathering witnesses and momentum like an approaching storm. When Sophia delivered Zoe's pasta, the girl hesitated before taking a bite. Is something wrong? Vivian asked gently. Zoe looked up, her eyes troubled. I don't feel like I should eat it now. Like I took something that wasn't meant for me. Vivian felt a surge of protective anger. This was the real damage of prejudice, making a child question whether she deserved the simplest things, making her feel unwelcome in spaces she had every right to occupy. Zoe Bennett, she said firmly but lovingly. You belong in this seat. You belong in first class. Your pasta belongs on your tray table. And no one, not a captain, not anyone, has the right to make you feel otherwise. Understand. Slowly. Zoe nodded and picked up her fork. With deliberate dignity that mirrored her grandmother's, she took a bite of her pasta, a small but significant act of resistance against the forces that would diminish her. But as the meal service continued, Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Whitfield wasn't finished, that the worst of this flight was yet to come. Halfway through the flight to Los Angeles, the aircraft encountered a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime, and Sophia moved through the cabin, ensuring that passengers were secure. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the captain turns off the sign, she announced professionally. The aircraft dipped and shuddered, causing a few nervous gasps from the main cabin behind them. Zoe gripped the armrests, her knuckles whitening slightly. It's just air pockets, sweetheart, Vivian assured her. Perfectly normal. Zoe nodded bravely, though her grip didn't loosen. I know. I'm fine. The cockpit door opened and Captain Whitfield emerged once again. Unlike the co-pilot's earlier discreet approach, Whitfield moved through first class with authoritative purpose, ostensibly checking the cabin during the turbulence. Safety inspection, he announced to no one in particular. When he reached row 2, he paused, his gaze settling on Vivian and Zoe. Everything secure here? Yes, Captain, Vivian replied evenly. We're fine. Instead of moving on, Whitfield lingered. These tickets are quite expensive, he remarked, an odd non sequitur that immediately put Vivian on alert. First class to LA can run upwards of $1 and $200 one way. Across the aisle, Thomas Lawson looked up sharply from his laptop. Amanda Pearson's recording device tilted slightly to better capture the exchange. I'm well aware of the fare structure, Vivian replied, maintaining her composure. I fly this route frequently. How exactly did you come to be in these seats? Whitfield pressed his tone, suggesting irregularity. Were they an upgrade? A standby assignment? The implication was clear. He couldn't imagine they had legitimately purchased first-class tickets. We booked and paid for first class, Captain Vivian stated firmly. As we always do. Zoe, sensing the tension, shrank further into her seat. The joy and excitement that had characterized her at the beginning of the journey had all but disappeared, replaced by a wary vigilance no child should have to maintain. Sophia approached quickly. Captain, can I assist with anything? Just ensuring all our passengers belong in their assigned seats, Whitfield replied. Emphasis on belong. Sometimes there are irregularities in the booking system. I can assure you their boarding passes were scanned correctly. Sophia insisted, professionalism battling with obvious discomfort. Seats 2A and 2B are correctly assigned to Ms. Bennett and Miss Zoe. Whitfield's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nevertheless, I'd like to verify their boarding passes again. You have no authority to do that, Thomas Lawson interjected from across the aisle, no longer pretending not to listen. Once boarding is complete and verified by the gate agent, passenger seating is established for the duration of the flight. Whitfield turned to him with barely concealed irritation. Sir, with all due respect, as captain of this aircraft, I am responsible for all aspects of the flight, including passenger placement for weight and balance considerations. Weight and balance, Lawson repeated incredulously. A 13-year-old girl and her grandmother. That's your concern. I don't believe I asked for your input, Whitfield replied coldly before turning back to Vivian. Your boarding passes, please. Vivian met his gaze steadily. Captain Whitfield, my granddaughter and I have been properly checked in, properly boarded, and are properly seated. Our documentation has already been verified multiple times. This request is unnecessary and, frankly, inappropriate. I'm simply following protocol, Whitfield insisted, though no such protocol existed. No, you're not, came Miguel Alvarez's voice from behind them. I fly Skyway twice a month, and captains never recheck boarding passes mid-flight. Ever. The first-class cabin had become utterly silent, all pretense of normal activities abandoned as the confrontation escalated. Even passengers in the first few rows of economy had begun to notice their curious faces appearing in the gap between cabins. Ms. Bennett Whitfield said, his voice hardening. If you refuse to comply with crew member instructions, I need to inform you that under FAA regulations, she has complied with all legitimate instructions. Sophia interrupted, her professional demeanor cracking slightly under the strain. Captain, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Whitfield ignored her, his focus fixed on Vivian. I need to see verification that you belong in first class. The word belong hung in the air, heavy with implication. It wasn't about boarding passes anymore, it never had been. It was about who Whitfield believed had the right to occupy premium spaces, who he believed belonged in proximity to power and privilege. Captain Vivian said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, I understand what's happening here. I've experienced it many times before, but let me be very clear, my granddaughter and I are not going to be moved, intimidated, or made to feel we don't belong. We are exactly where we are entitled to be. Amanda Pearson was now openly recording her influencer discretion, abandoned in the face of what was clearly becoming a significant incident. Several other passengers had their phones out as well, sensing that what they were witnessing might require documentation. The turbulence had subsided, but a different kind of tension now rocked the cabin, the clash between entrenched prejudice and quiet dignity, between unearned authority and rightful belonging. Perhaps, Whitfield said after a tense pause, we should check the manifest again. There may have been a booking error. There was no error. Sophia insisted, her professionalism now openly at war with her sense of justice. He'll be the judge of that, Whitfield replied, turning toward the front of the cabin. Palmer, bring me the manifest and verify these passengers' booking class. Gregory Palmer hesitated visibly, caught between his obligation to follow the captain's orders and his growing awareness that those orders were inappropriate. Now Palmer, Whitfield demanded. As Palmer reluctantly moved to retrieve the manifest, Vivian turned to Zoe. The girl's eyes were wide with anxiety. But something else burned there too, a dawning understanding of what it meant to stand your ground in the face of injustice. It's going to be all right, Vivian assured her granddaughter quietly. Remember what I told you. We know who we are and where we belong. Zoe nodded, straightening slightly in her seat. I know, Grandma, she whispered back, and we belong right here. The simple certainty in her young voice filled Vivian with fierce pride and steeled her resolve for whatever came next. Palmer returned with the passenger manifest, handing it to Captain Whitfield with visible reluctance. Whitfield scanned the document, his expression hardening as he found what he was looking for, or rather failed to find what he hoped to see. There appears to be a discrepancy, he announced, though the manifest clearly showed no such thing. According to our system, these seats should be assigned to standby upgrades from economy. Sophia stepped forward, her professional composure strained but intact. Captain, that's not possible. I personally checked them in, and their boarding passes were for first class, not upgrades. The system shows otherwise. Whitfield insisted, though he kept the manifest angled away from her view. There's been an error, and we need to correct it. May I see that Thomas Lawson requested, rising slightly from his seat. This is not your concern, sir, Whitfield replied sharply. It is when you're disrupting the entire cabin with unfounded claims, Lawson countered. Amanda Pearson's live stream had resumed her commentary, now a whispered play-by-play. The captain is now claiming there's some kind of ticket error, though the flight attendant is contradicting him. This is getting intense, folks. Vivian, who had remained remarkably composed throughout, finally reached for her phone. Captain Whitfield, this is becoming absurd. I have my confirmation email and receipt right here. She pulled up the email, clearly displaying their confirmed first-class booking complete with seat assignments and the substantial fare they had paid. As you can see, we booked and paid for first-class seats 2A and 2B 3 weeks ago. Whitfield barely glanced at the phone. Electronic documents can be altered. I need to verify with our central system. That's exactly what the manifest does. Sophia interjected, her patience visibly fraying. And it confirms their booking. Whitfield's jaw tightened. There's a verification issue, and according to protocol, these passengers need to be reseated in economy until it's resolved. There is no such protocol, Miguel Alvarez stated firmly from his seat. Sir, unless you're an airline employee, you have no knowledge of our internal procedures, Whitfield snapped. But I am an airline employee, came a new voice from the main cabin. A middle-aged black woman in a Skyway uniform had stood up in economy, Denise Taylor. 22 years with Skyway Airlines. I'm deadheading back to LA, and I can confirm there is absolutely no protocol requiring passengers to be reseated due to verification issues. What you're describing doesn't exist, Captain. A murmur ran through the cabin. Whitfield's face flushed with barely suppressed anger. This is my aircraft, he said, his voice dangerously low. And on my aircraft, we follow my procedures. Your aircraft, Vivian repeated, an eyebrow raised. I was under the impression this aircraft belonged to Skyway Airlines, and that all crew members are bound by company policies and federal regulations, not personal procedures. Several passengers nodded in agreement. The confrontation had now drawn the attention of nearly everyone on board, with many openly recording the exchange. Ms. Bennett Whitfield said, attempting to regain control of the situation, I need you and your granddaughter to move to row 15, where we have 2 available economy seats. Palmer will assist you with your belongings. We will not be moving, Vivian stated firmly. We have paid for these seats, we are properly ticketed for these seats, and we will remain in these seats. This is not a request, Whitfield insisted. As captain, I have final authority over passenger placement. No, you don't. Denise Taylor called from economy, not without a legitimate safety reason, which this clearly isn't. Zoe, who had been watching the confrontation with growing distress, suddenly spoke up. Is it because we're black? Is that why you want us to move? The cabin fell silent at the child's direct question. Whitfield's expression flickered between shock and anger. This has nothing to do with... he began, but Zoe continued. Because that's what it feels like, she said, her voice gaining strength. You didn't ask anyone else to show their tickets again. You didn't tell anyone else they don't belong here. Just us. The simple truth of her observation hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. Young Lady Whitfield said, his tone patronizing. This is an adult matter concerning airline procedures? No. Thomas Lawson interrupted, now fully engaged. The child is right. You've singled them out repeatedly since before takeoff. I've witnessed it, as have dozens of other passengers. Amanda Pearson nodded vigorously. All documented, she added, holding up her phone. every interaction. Whitfield looked around the cabin, seemingly realizing for the first time that his actions were being recorded by multiple passengers. His expression hardened. "This is becoming a security issue," he declared. "Palmer, call the Federal Air Marshal. We have disruptive passengers refusing crew member instructions." Palmer's eyes widened. "Captain, I don't think that's an order." Sophia stepped between Whitfield and Vivian's row. "Captain, there is no justification for involving air marshals. Ms. Bennett and her granddaughter have done nothing disruptive. They've simply refused an inappropriate request to give up seats they rightfully purchased." "I don't care what you think," Rodriguez Whitfield snapped. "I'm the captain, and am giving you a direct order." "An unlawful order," Denise Taylor called out, "which no crew member is obligated to follow." The situation had reached a breaking point. Passengers were openly recording, crew members were publicly contradicting the captain, and Whitfield's authority was crumbling in real time. Palmer Whitfield said, turning to the male flight attendant, who still seemed torn between protocol and conscience, "If Rodriguez won't follow orders, then you assist these passengers to economy immediately." Palmer hesitated, looking between his captain and Sophia, who firmly shook her head. Now Palmer Whitfield demanded. With visible reluctance, Palmer stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett, Miss Zoe I need to ask you to come with me to economy class. We will not be moving," Vivian repeated calmly. "Then you'll have to insist," Palmer said, his voice strained as he reached for Zoe's arm. "Do not touch my granddaughter," Vivian warned, her voice suddenly sharp with maternal protection. But Palmer, caught between Whitfield's order and his own better judgment, gently but firmly took hold of Zoe's arm. "Please, miss, I need you to come with me." "Let go," Zoe cried, the fear and indignation in her voice slicing through the cabin. "You're hurting me, Palmer, stop." Sophia moved to intervene, but Whitfield blocked her path. "Get your hands off me!" Zoe's voice rose higher as Palmer attempted to guide her from the seat. "I paid for this seat, Grandma." The cabin erupted in protests as passengers witnessed the 13-year-old being physically removed from her rightful seat. Phones recorded from every angle as Zoe struggled against Palmer's grip, tears now streaming down her face. "Let go of my granddaughter." Vivian's composure finally shattered as she rose to her full height, her voice carrying commanding authority that stopped Palmer in his tracks. "You will regret putting your hands on her." The statement wasn't delivered as a threat, but as a simple, incontrovertible fact, a prophecy that everyone present somehow knew would come to pass. In that moment of frozen tableau, Palmer still gripping Zoe's arm, Vivian standing with regal fury, Whitfield watching with cold determination, and dozens of passengers recording the scene, the confrontation had crossed a line from which there would be no returning. "Me?" Thomas Lawson announced loudly, "and what?" "In witnessing is assault on a minor discrimination and a violation of federal aviation regulations. I'm formally requesting that Captain Whitfield return to the cockpit immediately and that Miss Bennett be released." Miguel Alvarez had stood as well. "As a physician, I'm concerned about the physical and psychological distress being inflicted on this child. This needs to stop immediately. Over 20,000 people are watching this live stream right now," Amanda Pearson added, including, according to the comments, several Skyway executives. The pressure from all sides finally caused Palmer to release Zoe's arm. The girl immediately collapsed back into her seat, sobbing quietly as Vivian gathered her close, whispering words of comfort. Whitfield, realizing he had lost control of the situation but unwilling to back down, pointed a finger directly at Vivian. "This isn't over. He'll have security waiting in Los Angeles." "Good," Vivian replied, her voice steady once more. "I look forward to explaining exactly what happened on this flight to as many authorities as necessary." As Whitfield turned to retreat to the cockpit, Vivian's voice stopped him. "And Captain, you were right about one thing. He turned back, eyebrow raised. "This isn't over," she continued, steel in her voice. "Not by a long shot." As the captain disappeared into the cockpit, the cabin remained tense and silent. Sophia quickly brought a cup of water for Zoe and a cold compress for her arm where Palmer's grip had left a red mark. "I am so sorry," she whispered to both of them, genuine distress in her eyes. "This should never have happened." Vivian nodded acknowledgement but said nothing, her attention focused entirely on comforting Zoe. The girl's sobs had quieted, but she remained pressed against her grandmother's side, the excitement and joy that had marked the beginning of their journey now completely extinguished. Around them, passengers exchanged shocked glances, whispered conversations, and continued recording. What had begun as a routine flight to Los Angeles had become something else entirely, a stark display of prejudice, a test of dignity, and as Vivian had promised, something that was far from over. 20 minutes of uneasy calm followed Captain Whitfield's retreat to the cockpit. Sophia and several other flight attendants moved through the cabin offering water and reassurances to shaken passengers. Co-pilot Donnelly had emerged briefly, his face pale with concern as he observed the aftermath before returning to the flight deck without comment. Zoe remained close to Vivian's side, occasionally wiping away tears that continued to fall. The red mark on her arm had begun to darken into what would likely become a bruise, physical evidence of the manhandling she had endured. "Does it still hurt, sweetheart?" Vivian asked softly, examining the mark with gentle fingers. Zoe nodded slightly. "A little. But I'm okay." Despite her words, her voice trembled. Miguel Alvarez approached from his seat, medical instincts overriding airplane etiquette. "Excuse me, Ms. Bennett. I'm a physician. May I take a look at your granddaughter's arm?" Vivian looked to Zoe, who gave a small nod of permission. "It's a contusion," Miguel confirmed after a brief examination. "Minor, but it will bruise. You might want to apply ice for the next few hours." He reached into his carry-on and produced a small first aid kit from which he took an instant cold pack. "This should help." "Thank you, Dr. Alvarez," Vivian said with genuine gratitude. As Miguel returned to his seat, Thomas Lawson leaned across the aisle. "Ms. Bennett, I want you to know that I've documented everything. I specialize in civil rights law, and what happened here was textbook discrimination and assault." "I appreciate that," Vivian replied, "though at the moment my concern is getting my granddaughter safely to Los Angeles for her audition." Amanda Pearson, who had briefly stopped recording to make several urgent phone calls, turned to Vivian from her seat behind. "Ms. Bennett, you should know that this has gone completely viral. Over 50,000 people have seen the live stream and major news outlets are picking it up. Skyway's PR team has apparently gone into emergency mode." Vivian nodded acknowledgement but remained focused on Zoe. The girl's well-being took precedence over everything else. The tense calm was shattered when the cockpit door opened once more, and Captain Whitfield emerged, followed reluctantly by co-pilot Donnelly. Whitfield's expression was cold determination. Donnelly's was barely concealed distress. "This situation has become untenable," Whitfield announced, addressing the first-class cabin but looking directly at Vivian and Zoe. "We have a disruptive element that's compromising flight safety." Passengers exchanged incredulous glances. No one had been disruptive except the captain himself. Captain Sophia began, her professional demeanor strained to the breaking point. "There is no safety issue here." Everything was calm until Flight Attendant Rodriguez Whitfield cut her off sharply. "You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Return to the jump seat immediately." Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "You can't, I can, and I am," Whitfield interrupted. "Palmer, escort Rodriguez to the jump seat and then attend to your duties." Palmer hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. "Sir, I don't think that's an order, Palmer, unless you also wish to be reported for insubordination." With a pained expression, Palmer gently guided Sophia toward the rear of the cabin. As she passed Vivian's row, Sophia whispered, "I'm so sorry." Whitfield turned to face the passengers. Due to ongoing disruption and refusal to comply with crew member instructions, we are invoking FAA Regulation 121.533, which grants the captain full authority in emergency situations. I am exercising that authority now to restore order to this cabin. There is no emergency. Donnelly finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. Captain, this has gone far enough. I did not ask for your opinion. First Officer Whitfield replied coldly. Return to the cockpit and prepare for possible diversion. Diversion, several passengers echoed in disbelief. This is insane, Thomas Lawson stated, rising from his seat. You're manufacturing an emergency to justify your discriminatory behavior. Sir, return to your seat immediately, Whitfield ordered. Not until you return to the cockpit and cease this harassment, Lawson countered. Whitfield's jaw clenched. Palmer, remove these disruptive passengers from first class immediately. Row 2 seats, A and B, and row 2 seats, C and D. Palmer, who had returned from escorting Sophia to the jump seat, looked stricken. Captain, I cannot in good conscience. That's an order, Palmer. Now. Palmer stood frozen, caught between professional obligation and moral clarity. Palmer Whitfield's voice hardened. Now. With visible distress, Palmer approached Vivian and Zoe's row once more. Ms. Bennett, please, don't make this harder than it already is. You're the one making this choice, Mr. Palmer, Vivian replied steadily. You can choose not to follow an unjust order. Palmer swallowed hard, glancing back at Whitfield, who stood watching with cold expectation. Then, with reluctant determination, he reached for Zoe's arm again. No! Zoe cried, shrinking back against the window. Don't touch me again. Leave her alone, came shouts from multiple passengers. Palmer faltered, his hand still extended. Please, Miss Bennett. I don't want to use force, but the captain has ordered. Your captain's orders are illegal, Thomas Lawson interrupted. And if you touch that child again, you'll be named in the lawsuit along with him. Palmer looked desperately between Whitfield and the Bennetts, his professional world collapsing around him. Palmer Whitfield barked, Remove them now! With visible anguish, Palmer reached for Zoe once more this time, grasping her shoulder firmly. I'm sorry, he whispered as he began to pull the girl from her seat. Stop it. You're hurting me, Zoe sobbed, trying to twist away from his grip. Vivian stood immediately, her face a mask of controlled fury. Take your hands off my granddaughter this instant. I can't, Palmer replied, anguish in his voice. I have orders. Orders that violate federal law, Lawson reminded him sharply. But Palmer, caught in an impossible situation of his own, continued trying to remove Zoe from her seat. The girl resisted, crying out in pain and fear as she was half pulled into the aisle. Enough. Vivian's voice cut through the chaos like a commandment. You will not manhandle my granddaughter. She moved to intervene physically, but Whitfield stepped forward, blocking her. Ms. Bennett, you are interfering with crew member duties. That's a federal offense. What's happening is a federal offense. Amanda Pearson called out her phone, still recording everything. And over 100,000 people are watching it happen in real time. I don't care who's watching, Whitfield snapped, mask of professionalism completely abandoned. On this aircraft, I am the final authority. Meanwhile, Palmer had succeeded in pulling Zoe fully from her seat. The girl stood in the aisle, tears streaming down her face, one arm still in Palmer's grip. Please, she sobbed, looking around at the other passengers. I just want to sit in my seat. We paid for these seats. Please help us. The raw desperation in the child's voice galvanized the cabin. Miguel Alvarez stood. This is unconscionable. Let her go immediately. Denise Taylor had made her way forward from economy. "Palmer, as a fellow crew member, I'm telling you to release that child right now. You're violating company policy and federal law." Palmer's grip on Zoe's arm loosened slightly, uncertainty clouding his features. Seeing her chance, Zoe twisted suddenly and broke free, darting back toward her seat. "Stop her!" Whitfield ordered, but Palmer remained frozen in indecision. As Zoe tried to return to her seat, Whitfield himself moved to block her path. In the struggle that followed, his elbow connected with the girl's, face sending her stumbling backward into the aisle with a cry of pain. The cabin erupted in outrage. "He hit her," Amanda Pearson shouted into her live stream. "The captain just hit a 13-year-old girl." "That's assault," Lawson declared, phone raised to document everything. Vivian pushed past Whitfield to reach her granddaughter, who lay stunned in the aisle, a trickle of blood running from her nose. The sight of blood transformed Vivian's controlled anger into something terrible to behold. She helped Zoe to her feet, her movements gentle despite the fury radiating from her every pore. Then she turned to Whitfield, her voice low and deadly calm. "You have just made the worst mistake of your professional life." The statement hung in the air, not a threat, but a simple declaration of fact. "You think so?" Whitfield replied, a sneer in his voice. "I know so," Vivian answered with absolute certainty. From the back of the plane, Sophia had broken free from her jump seat and now rushed forward, wet towels in hand. "Oh my God," she gasped, seeing Zoe's bloodied face. "Medical kit! Someone get the medical kit!" Miguel quickly produced alcohol wipes and gauze from his personal kit, helping Sophia tend to Zoe's injury. Co-pilot Donnelly, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, finally took decisive action. "Captain Whitfield," he said firmly, "I am relieving you of command under FAA Regulation 121.557, which authorizes such action when the pilot in command is physically or mentally unable to perform duties. Your behavior constitutes a clear danger to this flight." Whitfield turned to him in shock. "You can't do that." "I can, and I am," Donnelly replied, using Whitfield's own words against him. "You have physically assaulted a minor passenger and created a hostile environment that endangers everyone on this aircraft." "This is mutiny," Whitfield hissed. "This is protection of passengers and crew," Donnelly corrected. "Return to the cockpit immediately. He'll join you momentarily to discuss the remainder of the flight." For a moment it seemed Whitfield might refuse. But as he looked around at the sea of recording devices, the outraged passengers, the injured child, and the resolute co-pilot, something in him finally seemed to register the magnitude of what he had done. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to the cockpit, the door closing firmly behind him. A collective exhale rippled through the cabin. Sophia and Miguel continued attending to Zoe, whose nose had stopped bleeding, but whose face was beginning to swell around the impact site. "Is it broken?" Vivian asked quietly, maternal concern temporarily overriding everything else. "I don't think so," Miguel replied after a gentle examination. "But she should be checked by an emergency physician in Los Angeles to be sure." Sophia turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize profoundly for what has occurred. This is not representative of Skyway Airlines or our values. First Officer Donnelly is now in command of this flight, and we will be proceeding to Los Angeles as scheduled." She turned back to Vivian, her professional mask finally cracking to reveal genuine distress. "Miss Bennett, Miss Zoe, words cannot express how sorry I am. This should never have happened." "No," Vivian agreed quietly, helping Zoe back to her seat. "It shouldn't have." As passengers gradually returned to their seats and a semblance of normal flight operations resumed, Vivian kept a protective arm around Zoe's shoulders. The girl leaned against her grandmother, physical and emotional exhaustion evident in every line of her small frame. "It hurts, Grandma," she whispered, touching her swollen face gingerly. I know, sweetheart, Vivian replied, her heart breaking at her granddaughter's pain. But I promise you this. What happened today will never, ever happen again. Not to us, and not to anyone else, if I have anything to say about it. And in that moment, as their aircraft continued its journey westward, a resolution was forming in Vivian Bennett's mind, a plan for accountability and change that would soon shake Skyway Airlines to its very foundation. The remainder of Flight 1187 proceeded in a state of stunned tension. First Officer Donnelly had taken command of the aircraft with Captain Whitfield confined to observer status in the cockpit, a professional humiliation without precedent in his career. The announcement of this change in command had come via the PA system in Donnelly's steady voice, notably lacking any explanation, but understood by everyone on board. In first class, Sophia had transformed row 4 into a makeshift medical station, clearing the seats to allow Zoe to lie down while Miguel Alvarez monitored her condition. The girl's nose had stopped bleeding, but the area around her right eye was swelling visibly, a bruise beginning to form that would soon darken to an unmistakable black eye. The swelling is normal, Miguel assured Vivian, who hadn't left her granddaughter's side, but it would be good to get some ice on it to reduce the inflammation. Sophia nodded and hurried to the galley, returning moments later with ice packs wrapped in washcloths. "This is all we have on board," she apologized. "Will it help?" "It's perfect," Miguel confirmed, helping Zoe position the ice pack against her face. "Hold it there for about 20 minutes. Okay?" Zoe nodded silently, her earlier spirit temporarily extinguished. She hadn't spoken since being helped back to her seat, responding only in nods or shakes of her head to questions from the adults trying to help her. Across the aisle, Thomas Lawson was on his phone, having somehow managed to get a signal despite their altitude. "Yes, I need to speak with Skyway's general counsel immediately," he was saying. "This is regarding an in-flight incident of discrimination and assault against a minor passenger." "Yes, ill hold." Amanda Pearson had finally stopped recording and was now scrolling through her phone with a shocked expression. "Ms. Bennett," she said, leaning forward, "you should know that the video has gone completely viral. Over 300,000 views in less than an hour. Major news outlets are picking it up. #justice. For Zoe is trending." Vivian nodded acknowledgement but remained focused on her granddaughter. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "It hurts." Zoe whispered her first words since the assault. "And I'm scared." "I know, baby. But you're safe now. What's going to happen when we land?" It was a good question, one that Vivian herself had been considering. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple case of discrimination. There was now physical assault captured on video from multiple angles witnessed by a plane full of passengers. This would not be easily dismissed or swept under the rug. "When we land," Vivian explained gently, "there will probably be police and airline representatives waiting. Well, tell them what happened, and Dr. Alvarez will help get you checked at a hospital to make sure you're okay." "But what about my audition?" Zoe asked, the prospect of missing her chance at the National Academy of Dance suddenly breaking through her shock. "It's tomorrow morning." "One thing at a time," Vivian soothed. "First, we make sure you're okay." Sophia approached again, her expression deeply troubled. "Ms. Bennett, I've been in contact with our ground team in Los Angeles. There will be emergency medical services waiting at the gate, as well as airline representatives and law enforcement." "That's appropriate," Vivian replied calmly. "A crime has been committed." "Yes," Sophia agreed quietly. "It has." She hesitated, then continued. "I want you to know that I've already given a preliminary statement confirming your account of events. So have several other crew members." "Thank you," Vivian said sincerely. "That couldn't have been easy." "It was the only right thing to do," Sophia replied. From 2 rows back, Denise Taylor approached. The Skyway employee, who had been deadheading an economy, had become an unexpected ally during the confrontation. "Ms. Bennett," she said, her voice low but intense. "I've worked for this airline for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened today. I want you to know that I've already contacted our union representative and filed a formal report. This isn't who we are as a company." "I appreciate that," Vivian replied. "But it happened on your aircraft with your staff under your procedures. So in some way it is who you are, or at least who you've allowed yourselves to become." Denise nodded soberly. "You're right, and that's why it needs to change." As she returned to her seat, Thomas Lawson disconnected his call and leaned across the aisle again. "Ms. Bennett, I just spoke with a senior attorney at Skyway. They're in full crisis mode. The CEO has been briefed." "Good," Vivian said simply. "They wanted me to convey that they take this very seriously and will have representatives waiting to speak with you in a private room at LAX. "I'm sure they will," Vivian replied. "But my priority is getting Zoe medical attention. Everything else can wait." Lawson nodded. "I've also contacted a colleague in Los Angeles who specializes in cases like this. She'll meet us at the airport if you'd like representation." "Thank you," Vivian said, "but I have my own legal team." In fact, she had already sent a brief text to her general counsel at Bennett Properties incident on flight. "Zoe injured. Need full team at LAX. Media likely present." The response had been immediate. "On it. Team assembling now." Miguel returned from conferring with Sophia. "We're about 45 minutes from landing," he informed them. "Zoe's vitals are stable, but she should definitely be examined at a hospital. I suspect she has a mild concussion from the impact." Zoe looked up in alarm. "Concussion? But my audition." "Let's not worry about that yet," Vivian interrupted gently. "One step at a time. Remember." As the cabin settled into an uneasy calm for the final portion of the flight, passengers continued to process what they had witnessed. Some spoke in hushed voices, reviewing video footage they had captured. Others sat in stunned silence. A few approached row 4 to offer support or to check on Zoe's condition. Amanda Pearson, who had returned to updating her social media following, suddenly gasped. "Ms. Bennett, the CEO of Skyway Airlines, just released a statement. Has flying to Los Angeles personally to address the situation." Vivian raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It was a predictable corporate response to a viral crisis, send the CEO to demonstrate how seriously they were taking the incident. But Vivian Bennett had been navigating corporate America long enough to know the difference between genuine accountability and damage control. The seatbelt sign illuminated as they began their descent into Los Angeles. Sophia moved through the cabin, ensuring everyone was secured for landing, pausing especially long at row 4 to check on Zoe. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "It still hurts," Zoe admitted. "And I'm tired." "You've been incredibly brave," Sophia told her. "Braver than many adults I know." As the plane began its final approach, Vivian gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, her mind already mapping out what would happen next. This incident would not be resolved with a simple apology or token compensation. What had happened to Zoe, what had happened to both of them, was emblematic of a deeper problem, one that existed not just in Skyway Airlines, but throughout industries and institutions across America. Her granddaughter's soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart. Did this happen because of how we look?" The question pierced Vivian's heart with its innocent directness. She considered sugarcoating her response, protecting Zoe from the harsh reality a little longer. But the girl had already experienced the ugliness firsthand. She deserved the truth. "Yes," Vivian answered honestly. "It happened because some people still make judgments based on skin color. They see us and decide without knowing anything about us that we don't belong in certain spaces." Zoe was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "That's really stupid," she finally said. Despite everything, Vivian felt a small smile form. "Yes," she agreed. "It is. But we do belong here," Zoe continued with quiet certainty. "We paid for these seats. We deserved to be here." "That's right," Vivian confirmed, a surge of pride cutting through her anger and concern. Even after everything that had happened, Zoe understood the essential truth. The problem lay not with them, but with those who sought to exclude them. As the aircraft touched down on the runway, Vivian took her granddaughter's hand and squeezed it gently. "Whatever happens next," she promised, "we face it together. And we make sure this never happens again." The plane taxied toward the gate where emergency vehicles, news vans, and a phalanx of airline representatives were already visible through the windows. Flight 1187 had landed, but the real journey, one of accountability, justice, and change, was just beginning. The cabin door opened to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Emergency medical technicians stood ready with a gurney. Airline representatives in dark suits hovered anxiously. And beyond them, visible through the terminal windows, news cameras and reporters jostled for position. First Officer Donnelly emerged from the cockpit to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Due to the incident during our flight, we ask that you remain seated until authorities have come aboard. Those needing to make connections will be personally assisted by Skyway staff." He approached row 4, where Zoe still reclined with the ice pack against her face. "Ms. Bennett, Miss Zoe," he said quietly, "I want to personally apologize for what happened today. It was inexcusable." "Thank you, First Officer," Vivian replied. "But the time for apologies has passed. Now is the time for accountability." Donnelly nodded soberly. "I understand. For what it's worth, I've already given my statement to both airline security and the FAA. Captain Whitfield has been removed from duty pending investigation." 2 paramedics boarded, directed immediately to Zoe. They introduced themselves as Kevin and Lucia, their manner gentle and professional as they began examining the girl. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" Lucia asked, carefully removing the ice pack to assess the swelling. Here Zoe pointed to her right eye and cheekbone, and "Sometimes my head feels dizzy." "We'd like to take her to the hospital for a full examination," Kevin informed Vivian. "Possible concussion, facial contusion." "Of course," Vivian agreed. "I'll accompany her." As the paramedics prepared Zoe for transport, Vivian reached for her phone and made a call. "Danielle, it's Vivian. We've landed. Yes, the situation is as serious as reported. Zoe is being taken to the hospital now. I need you to implement Protocol 7. She listened briefly, then continued. "Yes, full media blackout from our end for now. Have legal meet us at Cedars Sinai. And Danielle, call Julian. Tell him to clear his schedule." She disconnected, her expression resolute. Protocol 7 was Bennett Properties' crisis management system developed years ago after a construction accident had thrust the company into the spotlight. It involved a coordinated response from legal, PR, and executive teams, all focused on maintaining control of the narrative while preparing for either litigation or negotiation, depending on the circumstances. Sophia approached as Vivian put away her phone. "Ms. Bennett, airline representatives would like to speak with you in a private room at the terminal." "I'm sure they would," Vivian replied evenly. "Please inform them that I will be accompanying my granddaughter to the hospital. Any discussions will need to wait." "Of course," Sophia nodded. "They've also asked about your luggage. Have it delivered to the Peninsula Hotel," Vivian instructed. "Suite reservation under Bennett." As Sophia turned to relay these instructions, Thomas Lawson approached. "Ms. Bennett, my colleague is waiting in the terminal. She can accompany you to the hospital if you'd like legal representation present." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, but my team is already mobilizing," Vivian replied. "I appreciate everything you've done." Lawson handed her his business card. If you need another witness or any assistance at all, please don't hesitate to call. Miguel Alvarez joined them, medical bag in hand. I've spoken with the paramedics and given them my observations. I can accompany you to the hospital if you'd like a familiar face present during Zoe's examination. Vivian considered this offer. That's very kind, Dr. Alvarez, if it wouldn't be an imposition. Not at all, he assured her. My shift doesn't start until tomorrow morning. The paramedics had finished securing Zoe to the gurney and were ready to move. Mom, we're ready to transport your granddaughter now, Kevin announced. He'll be right beside her, Vivian confirmed, gathering her purse and Zoe's small backpack. As they prepared to disembark, Amanda Pearson approached quickly. Ms. Bennett, I just want to say, I'm so sorry this happened. The video has over 1 million views now and people are demanding action. Thank you for documenting everything, Vivian acknowledged. It may prove crucial in what comes next. If there's anything I can do, Amanda began. Actually, there is. Vivian decided. Could you send me all your footage, unedited, including anything from before the main confrontation? Of course, Amanda agreed, immediately exchanging contact information with Vivian. I'll transfer everything as soon as I get to my hotel. The paramedics began moving Zoe toward the exit. As they passed through first class, passengers offered words of support and encouragement. Stay strong, young lady. We're all behind you. What happened was wrong. We all saw it. Zoe managed a small, brave smile despite her swollen face. The girl's resilience brought a lump to Vivian's throat. As they reached the aircraft door, Captain Whitfield was visible in the cockpit, seated alone. His expression a mixture of defiance and dawning realization of the consequences he faced. His eyes briefly met Vivian's as she passed. This isn't over, she stated, not as a threat, but as a simple fact. The gurney was carefully maneuvered down the jet bridge where a small army of airline representatives waited. A woman in an impeccable suit stepped forward. Ms. Bennett, M. Samantha Wright, Vice President of Customer Experience for Skyway Airlines. On behalf of the entire company, I want to express our profound— Not now, Vivian interrupted firmly. My granddaughter needs medical attention. You can reach out through proper channels later. Wright looked taken aback, but nodded. Of course. We've arranged for a private exit to avoid the media if you'd prefer. Well, use the main terminal. Vivian decided, conscious of how attempts to circumvent publicity often backfired. But I won't be making statements at this time. As they emerged into the terminal, the commotion was immediate. Cameras turned their way. Reporters called out questions. Passengers from the flight were already giving impromptu interviews about what they had witnessed. Vivian maintained her composure, walking steadily alongside the gurney, one hand resting protectively on Zoe's shoulder. She neither hid from the cameras nor played to them, projecting instead a dignified determination that would become one of the defining images of the incident. At the terminal exit, an ambulance waited. As the paramedics loaded Zoe inside, Vivian turned to Miguel. Dr. Alvarez, would you mind riding with Zoe? I need to make one call before we leave, and there isn't room for everyone. Of course, he agreed, climbing into the ambulance. He'll be right behind you, Vivian promised Zoe, squeezing her hand before the doors closed. Once the ambulance had departed, Vivian stepped aside and made another call. Naya, it's happening. Yes, now. Full team at the peninsula in 3 hours. And Naya, get me Alexander Blackwell's direct number. The name belonged to Skyway Airlines' CEO, the man who was reportedly flying to Los Angeles to handle the crisis. Vivian intended to be fully prepared when he arrived. A sleek town car pulled up and a familiar face emerged. Julian Morris, head of legal for Bennett Properties and Vivian's trusted advisor for over 15 years. I came straight from the office, he explained, helping Vivian into the car. The others are assembling at the hotel. How bad is it? Worse than the videos show, Vivian replied as they pulled away from the curb. Zoe has a concussion, facial contusions, and psychological trauma. The captain explicitly singled us out from the moment we boarded, and it escalated to physical assault. My God, Julian muttered. And witnesses? A plane full, multiple recordings. 2 crew members have already given statements supporting our account. Julian nodded, making notes on his tablet. What's your preferred approach? Full legal press or negotiated settlement? Vivian gazed out the window for a moment, her mind made up. Neither. This isn't about money, Julian. It's about changing the system. He looked up, a slight smile forming. I suspected you'd say that. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Skyway Airlines is about to become the gold standard for anti-discrimination policies and practices in the aviation industry, Vivian replied, steel in her voice. Whether they want to be or not, the car accelerated toward Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, carrying a woman whose determination would soon reshape an entire industry. A woman who had promised her granddaughter that what happened on Flight 1187 would never happen again to anyone. And Vivian Bennett always kept her promises. While Zoe underwent examination at Cedars-Sinai, the digital aftermath of Flight 1187 was erupting with unprecedented force. Amanda Pearson's live stream had been the first to break the story, but dozens of passenger videos now circulated across platforms, each capturing different angles and moments of the confrontation. The hashtags #JusticeForZoe and #SkywayShame were trending nationally with #BlackGirls, in first class rapidly gaining momentum as a statement of solidarity. News organizations scrambled to piece together the story, reaching out to passengers, aviation experts, and civil rights leaders for commentary. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Child assaulted on Skyway flight after racial profiling incident." MSNBC featured a split screen of Zoe's injuries alongside Captain Whitfield's service photo with the caption, "Airline captain removed from duty after violent confrontation." Inside Skyway, Airline's corporate headquarters in Dallas, the crisis management team had gathered in the executive conference room, faces grim as they assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. Stock is down 11% and falling, reported the CFO, scrolling through real-time financial data on his tablet. Trading volume is through the roof. The head of public relations, a seasoned veteran of corporate disasters, looked shell-shocked. We've received over 50,000 messages across our social media platforms in the last hour alone. 97% negative. Multiple calls for boycotts. Celebrity influencers are weighing in. What about Whitfield? Demanded the chief operating officer. Where does that stand? The HR director consulted her notes. He's been removed from duty pending investigation as per protocol. But we have a problem. His personnel file shows 2 previous complaints of similar behavior, both resolved with verbal warnings only. A collective groan filled the room. That's going to look like a pattern of ignoring the problem, the legal counsel observed grimly. The plaintiff's attorneys will have a field day with that. The conference room door opened and Alexander Blackwell entered. At 52, Skyway's CEO still maintained the trim physique of the collegiate rower he once was, though premature silver at his temples and deep lines around his eyes spoke to the pressures of building the country's 4th largest airline. I've just watched the videos, he announced without preamble, his voice tight with controlled anger. All of them. I've also spoken with First Officer Donnelly and 2 of the flight attendants. This is indefensible. We're preparing a comprehensive statement, the PR director began. Condemning the actions, expressing support for the family, outlining immediate steps. Spare me the standard playbook, Blackwell interrupted. This isn't a baggage mishap or a flight delay. A child was physically assaulted by one of our captains after being racially profiled and humiliated in front of an entire cabin of passengers. And it's all on video from multiple angles. Legal is preparing for significant liability, the general counsel offered. We should consider an immediate settlement offer, possibly 7 figures. You're missing the point, Blackwell cut in again, pacing now. This isn't just a legal or PR problem. This is a moral failing. That child and her grandmother were in those seats legitimately. They were harassed, humiliated, and ultimately assaulted because of how they look. On my airline. He stopped, his expression hardening. That's not who we are. That's not who I want us to be. The room fell silent, executives exchanging uncertain glances. What are you suggesting? Alex, the COO, finally asked. Blackwell turned to his assistant. Get the jet ready. I'm flying to Los Angeles within the hour. Is that wise? The PR director ventured cautiously. Standard protocol would be to issue a statement first, then perhaps schedule a meeting after things have cooled down. There's nothing standard about this situation, Blackwell replied firmly. And things aren't going to cool down until we demonstrate genuine accountability. I built this airline from a regional carrier with 3 planes into a national brand based on respect and service. I'm not going to hide in my office while that legacy is destroyed. As the executives dispersed to carry out their assignments, Blackwell remained alone in the conference room reviewing the footage again. The images were damning, a tearful 13-year-old being physically removed from her rightful seat, then struck in the face when she tried to return. Her grandmother's quiet dignity throughout, the shocked reactions of other passengers, the moment when the co-pilot finally intervened. His phone vibrated with a text from his executive assistant. Ms. Bennett's office has requested your direct number. Blackwell didn't hesitate. Give it to them immediately. Meanwhile, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the examination of Zoe Bennett was drawing to a close. The emergency physician, Dr. Kapoor, consulted her tablet as she addressed Vivian. Miss Bennett has a mild concussion, as Dr. Alvarez suspected. The facial contusion is significant, but fortunately doesn't involve any fracture. We've documented all injuries photographically for your records. What about the audition tomorrow? Zoe asked anxiously from the examination table. Can I still do it? Dr. Kapoor's expression softened. With a concussion, even a mild one, I'd normally recommend complete rest for 48 hours. No physical exertion. Zoe's face fell, tears welling in her already swollen eyes. However, the doctor continued, if it's absolutely necessary, a brief, non-strenuous performance might be possible provided you feel well enough and don't experience dizziness or nausea. You would need to rest completely before and after. I can do that, Zoe said, immediately straightening with determination. I've been preparing for months. Let's see how you feel in the morning, Vivian suggested gently. Nothing is more important than your health. But Grandma, this is my chance. I can't let him take that away from me too. The simple statement hung in the air, powerful in its clarity. Zoe, young as she was, understood that allowing Captain Whitfield's actions to derail her dreams would be granting him a victory he didn't deserve. Vivian squeezed her granddaughter's hand, fierce pride mingling with concern. Well, make it work, she promised. Somehow. Outside in the waiting area, Julian Morris was coordinating with the Bennett Properties team while fielding a barrage of calls from media outlets seeking comment. He looked up as Vivian emerged from the examination room. How is she? He asked immediately. Mild concussion, facial contusion. They're discharging her now with monitoring instructions. Vivian's voice was steady, but the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. What's happening out there? Julian handed her his tablet displaying a social media dashboard. It's gone supernova. Every major news outlet is covering it. Celebrity activists are weighing in. Skyway's stock is in free fall. Vivian scanned the headlines quickly, her expression unreadable. There's more, Julian continued. Alexander Blackwell is flying in personally. His office reached out directly requesting a meeting tonight if possible. Interesting, Vivian murmured. What do we know about him, self-made? Built Skyway from a small regional carrier into a national airline. Reputation for hands-on leadership and customer service focus. No known history of discrimination issues at the executive level, though clearly there are problems in their culture. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Schedule the meeting for 9 p.m. at the Peninsula. I want our full team present and Zoe needs to rest first. Understood. And the press. No comment until after we've met with Blackwell. But have our statement ready to go, focusing on structural change, not compensation. As they spoke, Zoe emerged from the examination room in a wheelchair, as per hospital protocol, accompanied by Dr. Kapoor and Miguel Alvarez. Despite the swelling that distorted her young face, she managed a small smile when she saw Vivian. Can we go to the hotel now? Grandma Im really tired. Of course, sweetheart. Vivian replied gently, her public persona softening instantly in the presence of her granddaughter. The car is waiting. Doctor, Alvarez approached. I'll leave you here unless you need anything else. You've been incredibly kind, Vivian said sincerely. Thank you for everything. It was the least I could do, he replied. And Ms. Bennett, for what it's worth, I believe what you're doing matters, not just for Zoe, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel they don't belong. As they parted ways, a hospital administrator hurried over. Ms. Bennett, there is a rather large media presence gathering outside the main entrance. We can arrange for you to use a private exit if you prefer. Vivian considered this briefly, then shook her head. No, thank you. We have nothing to hide. Julian raised an eyebrow. Are you sure Zoe's been through enough today? Vivian looked to her granddaughter. What do you think Zoe private exit or front door? Zoe straightened in the wheelchair, a glimpse of her usual spirit returning. Front door. I'm not ashamed of anything. And so, as they emerged through Cedars-Sinai main entrance, cameras captured the image that would dominate news cycles for days to come. 13-year-old Zoe Bennett, face bruised, but expression determined, being gently helped into a luxury town car by her grandmother, whose quiet dignity spoke volumes without a single word being uttered. In Dallas, Alexander Blackwell boarded the corporate jet with a single briefcase, having cleared his schedule indefinitely. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The first lawsuit against Skyway had already been filed by passengers claiming emotional distress from witnessing the incident. Blackwell knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead in Los Angeles, where he would face Vivian Bennett, a woman who he was quickly learning had built her own remarkable career on turning moments of injustice into catalysts for change. As his aircraft taxied toward the runway, Blackwell scrolled through one last report. Bennett Properties' extensive history of successful discrimination lawsuits and subsequent corporate reform initiatives. The pattern was clear. Vivian Bennett didn't seek financial settlements. She demanded fundamental change, and she usually got it. The luxury town car carrying Vivian and Zoe Bennett pulled up to the Peninsula Hotel's discreet side entrance, where the head of security was waiting to escort them directly to their suite, bypassing the lobby where several reporters had already stationed themselves. The hotel, accustomed to high-profile guests requiring privacy, had implemented its VIP protocol the moment Julian Morris had called ahead. Ms. Bennett, everything has been arranged as requested, the security director informed them as they entered the private elevator. Your team is assembled in the conference room of your suite, and we've enhanced security throughout the property. Thank you, Vivian replied. Has our luggage arrived from the airport? Yes, ma'am. Everything has been placed in your respective rooms. As they ascended to the penthouse level, Zoe leaned heavily against her grandmother, the fatigue and emotional toll of the day finally overwhelming her young body. The ice pack she held against her face couldn't completely hide the swelling that had now developed into a distinct black eye. Almost there, sweetheart, Vivian murmured, supporting her with a gentle arm around the shoulders. You can rest soon. The suite that welcomed them was a study in luxury spacious rooms with panoramic views of Los Angeles' elegant furnishings and the hushed efficiency of high-end hospitality. But what caught Vivian's attention immediately was the team assembled in the main living area, 6 professionals from Bennett Properties' Crisis Management Division, including Julian Morris, who had somehow managed to arrive ahead of them. Zoe needs to rest before anything else, Vivian announced, guiding her granddaughter toward one of the bedrooms. Julian, give me 15 minutes. While Vivian helped Zoe settle in, gently applying a fresh ice pack and ensuring she had everything she needed, the team outside prepared for the strategy session ahead. Laptops opened, documents were arranged, and the latest social media analyses were pulled up on tablets. When Vivian emerged, her public persona was firmly back in place, the successful CEO who had navigated countless corporate challenges over decades in business. Status report, she requested, taking her seat at the head of the conference table. Danielle Chen, her chief of staff, began the briefing. The incident has gone viral across all platforms. Over 5 million views of the combined videos. Every major news outlet is covering it. Skyway's stock closed down 15% and is still falling in after-hours trading. Captain Whitfield suspended pending investigation, Julian replied. But we've uncovered 2 previous complaints against him for similar behavior, both handled with minimal disciplinary action. Clear pattern of ignored warning signs. The crew. First Officer Donnelly and Flight Attendant Rodriguez have both given statements supporting our account. Flight Attendant Palmer's situation is more complicated. He followed orders but clearly showed reluctance and distress. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. And Alexander Blackwell. His plane landed 30 minutes ago, Danielle reported. He's requested a meeting at your convenience. No entourage, no PR team, just him. Interesting, Vivian mused. That suggests he's either genuinely committed to addressing this personally, or he's attempting to manage the optics by appearing humble and direct. His background checks out, offered Raj Patel their research analyst. Built Skyway from a small regional carrier into a national airline over 15 years. Reputation for hands-on leadership. No personal history of discrimination complaints. Actually has a decent record of diversity initiatives at the corporate level. Yet this happened on his watch, Vivian noted, which means either his initiatives are surface level or they haven't permeated the operational culture. She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the Los Angeles skyline as she considered their approach. This wasn't her first experience with corporate discrimination, nor was it her first time leveraging such an incident into meaningful change. The pattern was familiar, but the stakes felt higher with Zoe directly involved. Julian confirmed the meeting with Blackwell for 9 p.m. here in the suite, she decided. Danielle, prepare our proposal, comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms, independent oversight committee, transparent reporting mechanisms, mandatory training with real consequences for non-compliance. The works. What about compensation? Julian asked. This isn't about money, Vivian replied firmly. It's about ensuring no other child experiences what Zoe did today. However, she added, include a substantial endowment for a scholarship fund focused on increasing diversity in aviation. That will be our only financial demand. The team nodded, understanding Vivian's strategy. This approach had worked before. Transform personal injury into structural reform, use leverage not for individual gain, but for collective improvement. Zoe's audition, Danielle inquired gently. Is still on the schedule for tomorrow morning, Vivian confirmed. The doctor cleared her for brief physical activity as long as she rests before and after. She's determined to go through with it. I've arranged for a private car and security, Julian noted. And I took the liberty of contacting the academy. They're aware of the situation and have offered to adjust her audition time if needed. Thank you, Vivian said sincerely. Now let's prepare for Blackwell. I want to know exactly what kind of man I'm dealing with before he walks through that door. While the team continued their preparations in Zoe's room, the young dancer had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her dreams troubled by the day's events. Twice she startled awake momentarily, disoriented, reaching for her face where the pain pulsed steadily beneath the ice pack. The second time Vivian was there, gently smoothing her hair back from her forehead. I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe, Grandma Zoe murmured, still half asleep. Will I still be able to dance tomorrow if you feel up to it? Yes. The academy knows what happened, and they're being very accommodating. Zoe nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "I want to dance," she said with quiet determination. "I need to show them they can't take that away from me." Vivian felt a surge of fierce pride. Even at 13, Zoe understood something fundamental about resistance, that sometimes simply continuing to exist in spaces others would deny you is itself an act of courage. "Rest now," she soothed. "We'll take it one step at a time." As Zoe drifted back to sleep, Vivian returned to the main room where her team was putting the finishing touches on their strategy. The television played silently in the background, showing footage of the incident alongside expert commentary and reaction shots of crowds gathering outside Skyway's corporate headquarters with hastily made signs demanding justice. At precisely 8:55 p.m., the house phone rang. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Blackwell has arrived. Send him up," Vivian directed, then turned to her team. "Places everyone. Remember, we're not seeking apologies or explanations. We're seeking commitment to specific, measurable change." The knock came at exactly 9:00 p.m. Julian moved to answer it, revealing Alexander Blackwell standing alone in the hallway. He carried no briefcase, no notes, just a single manila envelope tucked under his arm. His expression was grave, his posture that of a man prepared to face difficult truths. "Mr. Blackwell," Julian greeted him formally. "Please come in. Ms. Bennett is expecting you." As Blackwell entered the suite, Vivian Bennett rose from her seat at the head of the conference table, every inch the successful CEO she was, poised, confident, and unmistakably in command of the situation. "Mr. Blackwell," she said evenly, "I believe we have much to discuss. The meeting that would reshape Skyway Airlines and potentially the entire aviation industry's approach to discrimination was about to begin." Alexander Blackwell entered the Peninsula Hotel suite with the air of a man who understood the gravity of the moment. He declined Julian's offer to take his jacket, preferring to remain in full business attire, a subtle signal that this was not a casual conversation, but a formal reckoning. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his voice measured and direct. "First, I want to express my profound personal apology for what happened to your granddaughter today. The behavior displayed by Captain Whitfield was inexcusable, reprehensible, and in direct violation of everything Skyway Airlines claims to stand for." Vivian nodded once, acknowledging the apology without accepting or rejecting it. "Please sit down, Mr. Blackwell. We have much to discuss." As they gathered around the conference table, Vivian introduced her team briefly, each member nodding in turn. The formality of the setup, the organized documents, the professional team, the clear preparation established immediately that this was not merely a meeting to receive an apology, but a negotiation with significant stakes. "I came directly from the airport," Blackwell said, taking the seat across from Vivian. "No PR team, no corporate lawyers, just me. I wanted to speak with you personally before any official statements or legal maneuvers complicated matters." "That shows good judgment," Vivian replied, "though I suspect your legal team is already working overtime." A hint of a rueful smile crossed Blackwell's face. "They are, and they strongly advised against this meeting, but some situations transcend standard corporate procedure." "Indeed," Vivian agreed. "Like a 13-year-old girl being physically assaulted on your aircraft because of the color of her skin." Blackwell didn't flinch at the directness. "Yes, exactly like that." He placed the manila envelope on the table between them. "Captain Whitfield has been terminated effective immediately. Not suspended pending investigation. Terminated. His actions today were captured on dozens of videos and corroborated by multiple crew statements. There is no defense, no explanation, no mitigating circumstance that could justify what he did." Julian leaned forward slightly. "And flight attendant Palmer suspended without pay, pending a hearing," Blackwell replied. "His position is more complicated. He followed orders he should have refused, but multiple witnesses report his visible reluctance and distress. And the previous complaints against Whitfield, Vivian asked pointedly. The ones your company dismissed with verbal warnings. Blackwell's expression tightened. Those are part of what brings me here tonight. We've already begun an internal investigation into how those complaints were handled. The preliminary findings suggest a serious failure in our HR protocols. The executives who decided those outcomes are also being investigated. It shouldn't take a viral video and a public relations disaster to address a pattern of discriminatory behavior, Mr. Blackwell, Vivian stated. No, it shouldn't, he agreed without hesitation. And that's precisely why I'm here. This incident has exposed fundamental flaws in our company culture and procedures that I cannot and will not ignore. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Ms. Bennett, I didn't build Skyway to be a company where something like this could happen. I need to fix what's broken. Vivian studied him carefully. After decades in business, she had developed a keen sense for distinguishing genuine contrition from damage control. Blackwell's demeanor suggested the former, but she had learned never to take corporate promises at face value. How do you propose to do that? She asked directly. Blackwell reached for the manila envelope. I've drafted a preliminary plan for structural reforms throughout Skyway Airlines. He slid the document across the table. It's not comprehensive yet. I wanted your input before finalizing anything, but it outlines immediate steps and long-term initiatives to address the root causes of today's incident. Julian retrieved the document and handed it to Vivian, who opened it and began scanning the contents. Her team leaned in slightly, watching her reaction. This is more substantive than I expected, she acknowledged after a moment. Mandatory diversity training for all staff bias reporting mechanisms, revised hiring practices, flight crew diversity initiatives. She looked up at Blackwell. But these are mostly internal processes. What about accountability? What happens when these policies are violated? Turn to page 4, Blackwell suggested. Vivian did so, her eyebrows rising slightly as she read. An independent oversight committee with termination authority. Yes, Blackwell confirmed. A committee composed of industry experts, civil rights advocates, and passenger representatives with the power to review bias complaints and enforce consequences up to and including termination of any employee, regardless of position or seniority. Including executives, Julian pressed. Including me, Blackwell stated firmly. No exceptions. The room fell silent as Vivian continued reading, occasionally making notes in the margins. Finally, she closed the document and looked up at Blackwell. This is a good start, she said. But it's still reactive. What about prevention? How do you plan to change the culture that allowed Captain Whitfield to believe his behavior was acceptable in the first place? Blackwell nodded, accepting the critique. That's where I was hoping for your expertise, Ms. Bennett. Your company's diversity initiatives are considered the gold standard in commercial real estate. I want to implement something similar at Skyway, but adapted for our industry's specific challenges. Danielle Chen, who had been silently observing until now, spoke up. We've prepared our own proposal. She slid a document across the table to Blackwell. The Skyway Skies Initiative, a comprehensive program addressing both prevention and response. Blackwell opened the document and began reading, his expression growing increasingly impressed. This is remarkably thorough, he said after a moment, especially considering you've had only hours to prepare it. We've had decades of experience dealing with institutional discrimination. Mr. Blackwell, Vivian replied evenly. The specific context changes, but the underlying issues remain consistent. Blackwell continued reading, occasionally nodding. Proactive auditing using anonymous testers, mandatory scenario training using real-world examples, transparent public reporting of all bias complaints and resolutions. These are excellent proposals. There's more, Julian added. Turn to the last section. Blackwell did so, his eyes widening slightly. A scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. Yes, Vivian confirmed. Endowed by Skyway Airlines with an initial contribution of $5 million and sustained through annual commitments. That's a significant financial commitment, Blackwell observed. It is, Vivian agreed. But not compared to what you'd likely pay in legal settlements and brand damage from this incident alone. And more importantly, it addresses the pipeline problem that contributes to the lack of diversity in cockpits and executive suites throughout the industry. Blackwell set down the document and met Vivian's gaze directly. "I'll do it. All of it. The oversight committee, the training programs, the auditing mechanisms, the scholarship fund, everything in both proposals. And I want you to chair the implementation committee." The offer caught even Vivian by surprise. "You want me to oversee the implementation?" "Yes," Blackwell confirmed, "with full authority and a direct reporting line to me and the board. No bureaucratic barriers, no corporate interference." Vivian exchanged glances with Julian, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I'll consider it," she said carefully. "But first there's another matter we need to address," Zoe Blackwell said immediately. "Yes," Vivian confirmed. "My granddaughter was physically and emotionally traumatized today. She has a concussion and facial contusions. Her audition at the National Academy of Dance, which she's been preparing for months, is tomorrow morning, and she's determined to go through with it despite her injuries." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Blackwell asked sincerely. "No financial compensation?" Vivian stated firmly. "Zoe doesn't need your money. What she needs, what every child needs, is the assurance that they belong in any space they have rightfully earned, regardless of how they look or where they come from." "I understand," Blackwell said quietly. "Do you?" Vivian challenged. "Because Captain Whitfield clearly didn't. The flight attendant who grabbed her arm didn't. The corporate culture that dismissed previous complaints didn't." "No, I don't fully understand," Blackwell admitted. "I can't know what it's like to be treated the way your granddaughter was treated today. But I can listen. I can learn, and I can use my position to ensure it doesn't happen again, not on my airline, and hopefully not anywhere else if we can set a new standard for the industry." For the first time since the meeting began, Vivian's expression softened slightly. "That's a start, Mr. Blackwell. Please call me Alex." "Very well, Alex," Vivian conceded. "Now let's discuss implementation timelines. These changes cannot be gradual or phased in. They need to be immediate and comprehensive." For the next 2 hours, they worked through the details of what would become known as the Skyway Skies Initiative. Blackwell took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and occasionally offered modifications based on operational realities, but never once pushed back against the core principles or requirements. By 11:30 p.m., they had drafted a framework that satisfied both parties. "There's one more thing," Blackwell said as they prepared to conclude the meeting. "I'd like to speak with Zoe if she's willing. Not tonight, of course, but perhaps tomorrow after her audition. I want to apologize to her personally." Vivian considered this request carefully. "I'll ask her. It will be entirely her decision." "Of course," Blackwell agreed immediately. "I wouldn't want it any other way." As the meeting drew to a close, Blackwell stood and extended his hand to Vivian. "Thank you for meeting with me tonight, Ms. Bennett. I came here expecting a difficult but necessary conversation about damage control. Instead, I've been given an opportunity to fundamentally transform my company for the better. I won't squander it." Vivian shook his hand firmly. "See that you don't. Because I assure you, Mr. Blackwell, I will be watching very closely." "I'm counting on it," he replied with unexpected sincerity. After Blackwell had departed, Julian turned to Vivian. "What do you think? Is he genuine?" "I believe he is," Vivian replied thoughtfully. "But his sincerity isn't what matters. His actions are what will count, and now we've ensured those actions will be subject to independent oversight and public scrutiny." A good night's work, Julian observed. It's just the beginning, Vivian reminded him. Now comes the hard part, actually changing an entrenched corporate culture. She glanced toward Zoe's room. But for tonight, I'm more concerned about tomorrow's audition. Let's make sure everything is arranged for her. As her team dispersed to their respective tasks, Vivian quietly opened the door to Zoe's room. The girl was sleeping peacefully now, the ice pack having slipped from her hand onto the bed beside her. Even in sleep, her swollen face bore evidence of the day's trauma. Vivian carefully adjusted the covers around her granddaughter, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You showed more courage today than most adults ever will, she whispered. And tomorrow you'll dance. Not despite what happened, but because of it. Because you belong on that stage, just as you belonged in that seat. As she closed the door, Vivian's resolve hardened. The Skyway Skies initiative would be just the beginning. What happened to Zoe would become a catalyst for change throughout an entire industry, a transformation that would ensure no child ever again had to defend their right to occupy the space they had earned. It wasn't just about Skyway Airlines anymore. It was about creating a world where belonging wasn't determined by appearance, where dignity wasn't a privilege, but a right. And Vivian Bennett, as she had done throughout her career, would use every ounce of her influence and determination to make that world a reality. Starting tomorrow with a dance audition that would now carry far more significance than anyone could have anticipated. 1 month after the incident on Flight 1187, the consequences for those directly involved had begun to crystallize. In a private conference room at Bennett Properties' Atlanta headquarters, Vivian reviewed the latest updates with Julian and Danielle. Captain Whitfield's termination has been upheld by the arbitration panel, Julian reported, referencing his notes. His appeal was denied unanimously. Additionally, the FAA has suspended his pilot's license pending a formal review which could result in permanent revocation, and the criminal charges Vivian inquired. The Los Angeles District Attorney has filed misdemeanor assault charges, Julian confirmed. Trial is scheduled for next month. Given the video evidence and multiple witness statements, a conviction is likely. Danielle added Hez also facing civil lawsuits from several passengers who witnessed the incident claiming emotional distress. His attorney has reached out 3 times requesting that you intervene with the DA, which we've declined, Vivian stated rather than asked. Correct, Julian confirmed. Our position remains that legal consequences should follow their natural course without either vindictiveness or special intervention. The philosophy was consistent with Vivian's approach throughout her career. Justice required accountability, not vengeance. Captain Whitfield would face appropriate consequences for his actions, but she would not use her influence to either exacerbate or mitigate those consequences. What about Flight Attendant Palmer? She asked. His situation has evolved differently, Julian explained. After his disciplinary hearing, he was given the option of termination or a probationary path involving extensive community service bias training and regular work with anti-discrimination programs. And he chose the probationary path, Julian confirmed. Rather remarkably, he's become something of an advocate within the company. He's been speaking candidly about the pressure to follow orders even when those orders are clearly wrong, and the need for better protections for crew members who refuse to participate in discriminatory actions. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Palmer's journey reflected a more complex reality than the simple villains and victims narrative that sometimes dominated media coverage. His failure had been real and harmful, but his response to that failure suggested the potential for genuine growth and change. And flight attendant Rodriguez Vivian continued. Promoted to senior cabin training specialist, Danielle reported with a small smile. She's now developing the new bias response protocols for all Skyway flight crews. By all accounts, she's bringing remarkable insight and commitment to the role. Good Vivian approved. Recognition for those who did the right thing is just as important as consequences for those who didn't. "There's one more development regarding personnel," Julian added. "First Officer Donnelly has been promoted to captain, filling Whitfield's vacant position. His decisive action in relieving Whitfield of command has been incorporated into training materials as an example of ethical leadership in crisis situations." The update gave Vivian particular satisfaction. Throughout her career, she had observed how organizations often failed to reward moral courage even when it prevented greater harm. Donnelly's promotion sent a powerful message about the values Skyway was now prioritizing. Now regarding Zoe, Julian continued, his tone softening slightly. "The National Academy of Dance has confirmed her full scholarship for the academic year. They've been remarkably supportive, arranging housing near campus and coordinating with local schools for her academic education." Vivian felt a surge of pride and gratitude. In the midst of trauma, her granddaughter had found not just resilience but opportunity, a chance to pursue her passion with the full support of an institution that recognized her extraordinary talent and character. "Has she made a decision about the fall term?" Danielle asked gently. It was the question Vivian had been contemplating for weeks. Zoe's parents were scheduled to return from Sudan in October, which would allow them to be more directly involved in her education and care. But the Academy's fall term began in September, creating a difficult choice for the family. "She wants to go," Vivian confirmed. "And James and Amara support her decision. We're discussing logistics now, but it seems likely he'll relocate to Los Angeles temporarily to be with her until her parents return." The arrangement would require significant adjustments to Vivian's professional responsibilities, but she had already begun making those preparations, delegating key operations at Bennett Properties and restructuring her role with the newly formed Aviation Equity Commission. "And how is she doing overall?" Julian inquired, his concern genuine after weeks of working closely with both Bennetts. "Better than might be expected," Vivian replied, a mix of pride and lingering concern in her voice. "The physical injuries have healed completely. The emotional impact is more complex, of course. She still has moments of anxiety in crowded public spaces, and she's been having occasional nightmares." "Is she seeing someone professional?" Danielle asked. "Yes, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. Dr. Rivera has been wonderful. She's helping Zoe process the experience without letting it define her." The conversation paused as Vivian's assistant entered with a tablet displaying breaking news. "Skyway Airlines announces industry-leading diversity initiatives. Stock rises 4%. It seems the market is responding positively to the changes Julian observed. "The financial metrics were never our primary concern," Vivian reminded him, "but it's certainly helpful in sustaining corporate commitment to the reforms." As they concluded their review of individual outcomes, Vivian reflected on the complex interplay of justice, accountability, and transformation that had emerged from the incident. What had happened to Zoe remained painful and unjust. Nothing could change that fundamental reality. But the ripple effects of that moment had created opportunities for meaningful change that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Captain Whitfield would face appropriate consequences for his actions. Flight attendant Palmer had found a path toward redemption through accountability and advocacy. Sophia Rodriguez and James Donnelly had received recognition for their moral courage. And Zoe remarkable resilient. Zoe had not only persevered, but thrived, turning trauma into opportunity without minimizing the injustice she had experienced. It wasn't a perfect resolution. No resolution could be given the harm that had occurred. But it represented a thoughtful balancing of accountability, growth, and forward progress. And in Vivian's decades of experience addressing instances of discrimination, such balance was often the most sustainable foundation for lasting change. The grand ballroom of the Washington Convention Center hummed with anticipation as representatives from major airlines industry associations, civil rights organizations, and government agencies gathered for the official launch of the Aviation Equity Commission. At the center of the stage stood a podium flanked by the CEOs of 7 major airlines, with Alexander Blackwell and Vivian Bennett positioned prominently at its center. Today marks a new chapter in aviation history. Blackwell began his voice carrying across the packed room and to the live stream audience beyond. Not a chapter about technological innovation or market competition, but about fundamental human dignity. He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the assembly. 1 month ago, a 13-year-old girl was physically assaulted on one of our aircraft because of the color of her skin. That inexcusable incident exposed failures that extend far beyond any single airline or employee. It revealed institutional blind spots that have allowed discrimination to persist despite our stated commitments to equality and respect. The screens behind him displayed the new Commission's logo, a stylized aircraft wing forming an equal sign accompanied by the slogan, "Dignity in Flight, Everyone Belongs." The Aviation Equity Commission represents an unprecedented commitment from competing airlines to address these issues collectively rather than individually. Blackwell continued. We recognize that discrimination in air travel isn't a competitive advantage for anyone. It's a failure we must all work together to eliminate. He turned, slightly gesturing to Vivian. To ensure this initiative has genuine impact rather than mere good intentions, we've unanimously selected Vivian Bennett to serve as the Commission's founding chairperson. Ms. Bennett brings decades of experience in corporate accountability and anti-discrimination work, along with the moral authority that comes from personal experience with the very issues we seek to address. As Vivian stepped to the podium, a wave of applause rippled through the ballroom. Her poised demeanor and measured expression conveyed both gravitas and determination. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," she began. "I accept this position with a clear understanding of both the opportunity and the challenge it represents. The Aviation Equity Commission is not designed to be a public relations exercise or a symbolic gesture. It is a working body with real authority, substantial resources, and specific mandates." She outlined the Commission's core functions, developing industry-wide anti-discrimination standards, conducting regular audits of airline practices, investigating bias complaints through an independent review process, and mandating specific reforms when necessary. Participating airlines have committed to full transparency and compliance with the Commission's findings and directives, Vivian emphasized. This includes opening their training programs, complaint records, and internal policies to Commission review and implementing required changes within specified timeframes. The scope of airline commitment was indeed unprecedented, a fact not lost on the industry analysts and regulatory officials in attendance. Such extensive external oversight represented a dramatic departure from the aviation industry's traditional approach to self-regulation. To ensure the Commission maintains independence and credibility, its governance structure includes equal representation from airlines, passenger advocacy groups, and civil rights organizations. Vivian continued. And to ensure it has the necessary resources for effective operation, participating airlines have committed $50 million in initial funding with additional annual contributions based on passenger volume. The financial commitment drew murmurs from the audience, another indication that this initiative represented more than symbolic gestures or temporary damage control. Perhaps most importantly, Vivian added her voice, taking on additional gravity. The Commission will regularly publish comprehensive data on bias complaints, investigations, and resolutions. This transparency will allow the public to track our progress, or lack thereof, and hold both the Commission and participating airlines accountable for genuine improvement. As she concluded her formal remarks, Vivian departed briefly from her prepared text. "I stand before you today, not just as a corporate executive or a policy advocate, but as a grandmother. What happened to my granddaughter on Flight 1187 was painful and unjust. But from that painful moment has emerged an opportunity for meaningful change. Change that will benefit countless passengers who might otherwise face similar treatment without the protection of viral videos or public outrage." Her voice softened slightly, becoming more personal. "Zoe is healing. She's pursuing her dreams as a dancer with remarkable resilience and courage. and one of the things that gives her comfort is knowing that her experience is catalyzing changes that will help others, that what happened to her will not have been in vain. The room fell silent, media representatives and industry executives alike momentarily reminded of the human reality behind the policies and press releases. A 13-year-old girl with a bruised face, traumatized but determined to transform her experience into something constructive. Following the formal launch, Vivian participated in a series of interviews and panel discussions elaborating on specific aspects of the commission's structure and objectives. Throughout, she maintained a careful balance, acknowledging the significance of the initiative without overestimating its immediate impact, recognizing the airline's commitment while emphasizing the need for ongoing accountability. In a particularly pointed exchange with a skeptical industry analyst, she addressed the question of sustainability directly. Will this commission still exist 5 years from now when the public outrage has faded and new priorities have emerged? That depends entirely on results. If we demonstrate meaningful reduction in discriminatory incidents and improved responses, when they do occur, the value proposition becomes self-evident. If we fail to produce measurable improvement, then we deserve to be disbanded and replaced with something more effective. Later that evening, in a more private gathering with the Commission's founding board members, Vivian outlined her vision for the first year of operations. We'll begin with a comprehensive baseline assessment of current practices across all participating airlines, she explained. This will give us concrete metrics against which to measure progress. Simultaneously, we'll establish the independent review process for bias complaints, ensuring it's accessible to all passengers, regardless of language technology access or legal knowledge. Sarah Martinez, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, and a key ally in the Commission's formation, raised a critical question. How do we ensure this remains a priority when the next crisis emerges? Airlines face new challenges every quarter: financial pressures, operational issues, competitive threats. What keeps equity from becoming just another box to check? It was the question at the heart of sustainable change: how to maintain momentum when public attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. Vivian's response reflected decades of experience in corporate transformation. By embedding these values in operational processes and accountability structures, not just mission statements, she replied. By tying leadership compensation to equity metrics alongside financial performance. By creating internal champions at every level of each organization. And perhaps most importantly, by demonstrating that treating all passengers with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. As the discussion continued, Alexander Blackwell observed the interaction with thoughtful attention. The Skyway CEO had undergone a visible evolution over the past month from crisis manager to genuine advocate. The transformation seemed authentic rather than strategic, suggesting the possibility that institutional change might sometimes begin with personal change. Later, as the gathering concluded, he approached Vivian privately. I wanted you to know that the Skyway Skies Scholarship Program has selected its first recipients, he informed her. 10 students from underrepresented backgrounds who will receive full funding for aviation career training from pilot certification to aerospace engineering. That's excellent news, Vivian acknowledged. Expanding the pipeline is essential for long-term transformation. There's something else. Blackwell continued, a hint of emotion in his voice. The program's official name is the Zoe Bennett Scholarship for Aviation Excellence. With your permission, of course. The gesture caught Vivian by surprise, a reminder that beneath the corporate structures and policy initiatives were human beings capable of genuine growth and understanding. I'll need to discuss it with Zoe, she replied carefully. It's her name, her experience. She should decide how it's used. Of course, Blackwell agreed immediately. It was presumptuous to suggest it without consulting her first. Please extend my apologies. As Vivian departed the convention center that evening, she reflected on the day's events with cautious optimism. The Aviation Equity Commission represented a promising framework for industry-wide change, one with substantial resources, meaningful authority, and transparent accountability. But frameworks alone didn't create transformation. That would require sustained commitment, cultural evolution, and constant vigilance against the tendency for institutions to revert to comfortable patterns. The journey ahead would be challenging, certainly, but as she recalled Zoe's words from a month earlier, "I want to show them they can't take that away from me," Vivian felt a renewed sense of purpose. This work wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about ensuring that every passenger could move through the world with the dignity and respect they deserved, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. It was in the most fundamental sense about belonging, and that made all the challenges worthwhile. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the National Academy of Dance's main studio as Zoe Bennett moved through the final sequence of her solo piece. Her reflection multiplied across mirrored walls as she executed a series of precise turns, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. The music built toward its crescendo, and Zoe responded with increasingly complex combinations, her face a study in focused intensity. As the final notes resonated through the space, she held her ending pose for 3 deliberate beats before relaxing. From the side of the studio, a small group of observers broke into spontaneous applause. "Beautiful work," Zoe called Madame Rousseau, the Academy's artistic director. "The evolution of this piece is remarkable." Zoe smiled, slightly breathless from the exertion. "Thank you. I've been working on the emotional through-line like you suggested." It shows Madame Rousseau affirmed. "The technical elements were always strong, but now there's a depth of feeling that transforms mere movement into storytelling." 2 months had passed since the incident on Flight 11A7, and Zoe's life had undergone significant transformation. Having been accepted into the Academy's prestigious summer intensive program, she now spent her days immersed in dance ballet in the mornings, contemporary in the afternoons, with additional classes in composition, music theory, and dance history. The physical evidence of her ordeal had long since faded, the bruising around her eye completely healed. But the experience had left its mark in other ways, influencing her artistic development in unexpected directions. "Zoe, would you be willing to share a little about the inspiration behind this piece?" asked Mrs. Winters, the composition instructor who had been helping Zoe develop her choreography. The 13-year-old nodded, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "It's called belonging," she explained. "It's about occupying spaces where others think you don't fit and finding your power there instead of letting their perceptions diminish you." The simple explanation carried unmistakable echoes of her experience on the flight, though Zoe had translated those emotions into movement rather than explicit narrative. There were no literal representations of the confrontation or assault. Instead, the choreography explored broader themes of resistance, resilience, and reclamation through abstract movement patterns. I particularly appreciate the contrast between the opening sequence where the movement is constrained and hesitant, and the final section where you literally expand to fill the entire space, commented Mr. Reeves, the contemporary dance instructor. "It's a powerful visualization of claiming your rightful place." Zoe smiled at the observation. "That's exactly what I was trying to convey." As the session concluded and the instructors departed, Vivian approached from the observation area where she had been watching. For the past 2 months, she had divided her time between Atlanta, where Bennett Properties required her occasional presence, Washington, D.C., where the Aviation Equity Commission was headquartered, and Los Angeles, where Zoe was pursuing her dance training. "That was breathtaking, sweetheart," she said, embracing her granddaughter. "You've made incredible progress in such a short time." "Thanks, Grandma," Zoe replied, toweling off as they walked toward the dressing rooms. "It feels different now when I dance. Before I was always worried about getting the steps perfect. Now I'm more focused on what I want to say through the movement." The observation reflected a maturity beyond her 13 years, a deepened artistic perspective that had emerged paradoxically from trauma. Without minimizing the injustice she had experienced, Zoe had somehow found a way to transform it into creative growth. Later, as they shared an early dinner at a cafe near the academy, Zoe brought up a topic that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about Mr. Blackwell's request," she said, "about naming the scholarship program after me." Vivian set down her fork, giving her granddaughter her full attention. "And what are your thoughts?" At first, I wasn't sure, Zoe admitted. It seemed weird to have my name on something so official. But then I realized it could be important, not because it's my name specifically, but because it connects the scholarship to what actually happened. "How do you mean?" Vivian asked, intrigued by her granddaughter's reasoning. "Well, if they just called it the Skyway Diversity Scholarship or something corporate like that, it would be easy to forget why it exists," Zoe explained. "But with my name on it, everyone who applies or receives it will know it came from a real incident where a real person was hurt because of discrimination. And that makes the purpose clearer." Vivian nodded, once again impressed by Zoe's insight. "That's a very thoughtful perspective. So, I think I want to say yes," Zoe concluded, "but with one condition. What's that? I want to meet the scholarship recipients each year, not just as a photo opportunity, but to really talk with them about their goals and experiences. If my name is going to be on it, I want to be genuinely involved." The request reflected Zoe's growing understanding of meaningful engagement versus tokenism, another aspect of her accelerated maturation in the wake of the incident. "I think that's entirely reasonable," Vivian agreed. "I'll convey your decision to Mr. Blackwell along with your condition." As they continued their meal, the conversation shifted to practical matters. Zoe's upcoming performance in the Academy's summer showcase arrangements for her parents' return from Sudan and preparations for the fall academic term. "Dad says they might be able to come back a few weeks early." Zoe mentioned, her face brightening at the prospect, maybe even in time for the showcase. "That would be wonderful," Vivian agreed. "I know how much they want to see you perform." Despite the physical distance, James and Amara Bennett had remained closely connected to their daughter's journey, participating in weekly video calls and receiving regular updates on both her dance progress and her psychological healing. They had been supportive of her decision to pursue the opportunity at the National Academy, recognizing the importance of not allowing the incident to derail her dreams. "Grandma," Zoe said suddenly, her expression turning more serious, "do you think what happened on the plane will always be part of my story? Will I always be that girl who was dragged from her seat?" The question revealed a concern that had been simmering beneath Zoe's outward resilience, the fear of being permanently defined by a single traumatic moment. Vivian considered her response carefully. "It will always be part of your story. Yes," she acknowledged honestly, "but it won't be your whole story, or even the most important part of it. Already you're becoming known for your dancing, for your choreography, for the way you express complex emotions through movement. And as you continue to grow and create and achieve, that incident will become just one chapter in a much larger narrative." Zoe nodded, seeming reassured by this perspective. "I've been talking with Dr. Rivera about that too," she mentioned, referring to her therapist. "She says trauma can either become a limiting identity or a formative experience depending on how we integrate it." "Dr. Rivera is very wise," Vivian observed. "And based on what I've seen in these past 2 months, you're definitely taking the integration path." Later that evening, as they returned to their temporary apartment near the academy, Zoe received a message that brought an unexpected smile to her face. "What is it?" Vivian inquired, noting her granddaughter's reaction. "It's from Sofia Rodriguez." Zoe explained, showing her the screen. "She's been promoted to head of flight attendant training for the entire Skyway system. She says she's incorporating my story into their new training program, just like we discussed." The development represented another example of how the incident's impact continued to ripple outward in constructive ways, changing not just individual lives, but institutional practices and professional standards. As Zoe prepared for bed, Vivian found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey they had traveled since that day on Flight 1187. The incident had been painful and unjust without question, but it had also catalyzed transformation in Zoe and Skyway Airlines, in the aviation industry more broadly, and even in Vivian's own professional focus. From trauma had emerged not just resilience but purpose, a sense of meaning that transcended the original injustice. And while nothing could erase what had happened, the direction of what followed suggested the possibility of genuine healing, not just for individuals, but for systems. As she kissed her granddaughter goodnight, Vivian was struck once again by the extraordinary courage and wisdom this child had demonstrated throughout the ordeal. "I'm so proud of you, Zoe," she said softly. "Not just for your dancing, but for who you are, your strength, your insight, your determination to create something positive from a negative experience." "I learned it from you," Grandma Zoe replied sleepily. "You always say that what matters isn't what happens to us, but how we respond." The simple statement captured the essence of Vivian's life philosophy, one she had developed through decades of confronting discrimination and working for change. Now, in her granddaughter, she saw that philosophy taking root in a new generation, promising to extend its impact far beyond her own lifetime. It was perhaps the most meaningful legacy she could hope to leave. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hilton was electric with anticipation. Hundreds of aviation industry professionals, civil rights advocates, and media representatives had gathered for the first annual Aviation Equity Summit, a conference that would have been unimaginable just 12 months earlier. On the main stage, a distinguished panel discussed the progress made during the inaugural year of the Aviation Equity Commission. Charts and graphs on the screens behind them told a compelling story. Bias complaints down 47% across participating airlines, response protocols standardized throughout the industry. Transparent reporting mechanisms implemented at over 300 airports nationwide. The data is encouraging, noted Dr. Marcus Chen, the Commission's research director. But numbers only tell part of the story. The real measure of success is the changing experience of passengers from all backgrounds as they navigate air travel. In the front row, Vivian Bennett listened with careful attention, making occasional notes on her tablet. As the Commission's founding chairperson, she had guided its evolution from concept to functioning reality, navigating the complex intersection of corporate interests, regulatory requirements, and authentic accountability. Beside her sat Zoe, now 14 and noticeably taller than she had been a year earlier. Her presence at the summit was both symbolic and substantive, a living reminder of the incident that had catalyzed the Commission's formation, but also an active participant in its ongoing work. When the panel concluded, the conference transitioned to its keynote presentation. Alexander Blackwell approached the podium, his demeanor reflecting the transformation he had undergone since that initial crisis meeting in the Peninsula Hotel suite. 1 year ago, he began a 13-year-old girl was assaulted on a Skyway Airlines flight because of the color of her skin. That inexcusable incident exposed failures that extended far beyond any single airline or employee, failures that demanded fundamental reform rather than superficial damage control. The screens behind him displayed a familiar image, the Aviation Equity Commission's logo, a stylized aircraft wing forming an equal sign accompanied by the slogan, "Dignity in Flight, Everyone Belongs." Today we mark not the conclusion of that reform effort, but its first milestone, Blackwell continued. The Commission's inaugural report, which you've all received, documents both substantial progress and persistent challenges. It represents not just data collection, but a roadmap for continuing improvement. He gestured toward Vivian and Zoe in the front row. We are honored to have with us the two individuals who transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Their courage, insight, and determination have helped reshape not just Skyway Airlines but the entire aviation industry's approach to equity and inclusion. The audience rose in spontaneous standing ovation, a gesture of respect not just for Vivian's professional leadership, but for Zoe's personal resilience and advocacy. Later, during the summit's recognition luncheon, another significant moment unfolded. The first recipients of the Zoe Bennett Scholarship for Aviation Excellence were introduced 10 students from underrepresented backgrounds who would receive full funding for pilot training, aerospace engineering degrees, and other aviation career pathways. As promised a year earlier, Zoe had been personally involved in the selection process, reviewing applications and participating in finalist interviews. Now she stood to address the scholarship recipients, her composure and articulation belying her youth. "When I boarded that flight to Los Angeles last year," she began, "I was focused on a dance audition. I never imagined that experience would lead to this moment or to the opportunities you're now receiving." Her gaze swept across the 10 scholarship recipients, diverse in age, ethnicity, and background, but united by their dreams of aviation careers and their commitment to equity within the industry. "What happened to me was painful," Zoe acknowledged frankly. "But what you're going to do with these scholarships, the paths you'll forge, the changes you'll create, the example you'll set for others that transforms that painful moment into something meaningful and lasting." The simplicity and authenticity of her address contrasted sharply with the more formal presentations that had preceded it. There was no corporate jargon, no statistical analysis, just the clear voice of a young woman who had somehow found purpose in adversity. "I'm not a pilot or an engineer," she concluded with a small smile. "I'm a dancer. But I believe we're working toward the same goal, creating spaces where everyone truly belongs, where dignity isn't determined by how you look or where you come from. Your success will be part of that journey, and I can't wait to see where it leads." As the luncheon transitioned to networking sessions and breakout discussions, Vivian and Zoe found a quiet moment together in a side room of the hotel. The past year had been transformative for both of them, Vivian stepping back from day-to-day operations at Bennett Properties to lead the commission, Zoe balancing her intensive dance training with her growing role as an advocate. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it," Vivian told her granddaughter, squeezing her hand affectionately. "Your speech was perfect, genuine, focused, encouraging." "I was nervous," Zoe admitted. "They're all so accomplished and some of them are adults. I wasn't sure what I could possibly say that would be meaningful to them." "Your authenticity is what makes your words powerful," Vivian assured her. "You speak from direct experience, not abstract theory. That resonates with people in a way that policy papers and formal presentations never can." The observation reflected a truth that had become increasingly evident throughout the year. Zoe's impact extended far beyond her role as the face of the incident. She had emerged as a thoughtful, articulate advocate whose perspective helped ground the commission's work in lived reality rather than corporate abstraction. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Alexander Blackwell, who had been searching for them after the luncheon concluded. "Miss Bennett, Zoe," he greeted them warmly. "I wanted to share some news before it's announced more broadly. The Federation of International Airlines has voted to adopt the aviation equity standards as a global requirement for member carriers. The development represented a significant expansion of the Commission's impact, extending its reach beyond the United States to airlines around the world." "That's remarkable progress," Vivian acknowledged. "When we first discussed these standards, there was concern they might create competitive disadvantages for participating airlines." "The opposite has proven true," Blackwell replied. "Our customer satisfaction metrics have actually improved as discriminatory incidents declined. Turns out treating all passengers with dignity is good for business." The observation was delivered without irony, a genuine recognition that ethical practice and business success were not inherently opposed as some had feared. The past year had demonstrated that meaningful reform could align with operational excellence, creating value for both passengers and shareholders. As they prepared to return to the conference sessions, Zoe posed a question that had been on her mind throughout the summit. "Mr. Blackwell, do you think what we're doing will really last, or will things go back to how they were once people forget about what happened?" It was the question at the heart of sustainable change, whether reforms driven by crisis and public attention could survive once that attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. Blackwell considered it thoughtfully before responding. "I believe it will last," he said finally. "Not because of policies or procedures, though those are important, but because we've changed the underlying culture, the unspoken assumptions about who belongs where, whose complaints matter, how authority should be exercised." He glanced at Vivian, acknowledging her expertise in institutional transformation. "Your grandmother taught me something crucial this past year. Genuine change isn't about creating rules that force people to behave differently. It's about creating environments where people naturally make better choices because they understand the why, not just the what." The insight reflected Blackwell's own evolution from crisis manager to authentic advocate, from reactive damage control to proactive leadership. Like the industry he helped reshape, he had been transformed by the journey that began with that painful incident on Flight 1187. As the afternoon sessions commenced, focused on implementing equity practices across different operational areas, Vivian found herself reflecting on the past year's journey. The transformation had not been perfect, or complete bias incidents still occurred, albeit less frequently. Some airlines participated more enthusiastically than others. Passengers still experienced occasional discrimination, but the direction of change was unmistakably positive. The Aviation Equity Commission had established itself as a permanent independent force for accountability within the industry. The standards it developed were being adopted internationally. The data it collected was informing improvements in everything from hiring practices to complaint resolution protocols. And perhaps most significantly, a new generation of aviation professionals was emerging with a fundamentally different perspective on equity and inclusion. The scholarship recipients Zoe had addressed would enter the industry not as passive participants in existing systems, but as active agents of continuing transformation. It wasn't the end of the journey by any means, but it was a meaningful milestone, a moment to acknowledge how far they had come from that traumatic day when a 13-year-old girl had been dragged from her seat and struck in the face for daring to occupy a space someone believed she didn't deserve. No resolution could erase that injustice. No reform could undo the harm that had been done. But together they had transformed that painful moment into something constructive and lasting, a legacy of change that would benefit countless passengers for years to come. And that Vivian reflected as she watched her remarkable granddaughter engage confidently with industry leaders and advocacy partners was perhaps the most healing resolution one could hope for. The sunset painted the Los Angeles sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink as Vivian and Zoe made their way across the tarmac at LAX. Before them stood a sleek Skyway Airlines Boeing 737, not a regular commercial flight, but a special charter bound for Atlanta. "It looks different somehow," Zoe observed, studying the aircraft that so closely resembled the one from Flight 1187 a year earlier. "It should," Vivian replied with a small smile. "It's the first aircraft to be fully retrofitted under the new equity standards, from cabin configuration to crew training to passenger information systems." As they ascended the stairs and entered the aircraft, they were greeted by a familiar face, Sofia Rodriguez, now serving as Skyway's Director of In-Flight Experience. "Welcome aboard," she said with genuine warmth, embracing first Zoe and then Vivian. "It means so much that you're here today." The interior revealed subtle but significant changes from traditional airline layouts. The cabin featured a more inclusive design, from accessible seating arrangements to multilingual signage to cultural sensitivity in entertainment offerings. But the most meaningful difference was invisible, the comprehensive training now required for every crew member with specific protocols for ensuring dignified treatment of all passengers. As they settled into their seats in the first row, Zoe looked around with thoughtful attention. "It feels different," she observed. "More welcoming somehow." From the cockpit emerged Captain James Donnelly, whose promotion following his intervention on Flight 1187 had marked one of the first tangible consequences of the incident. He approached Zoe with respectful deference. "Ms. Bennett," he greeted her formally, "I wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done this past year. Your courage has transformed our industry in ways we're only beginning to fully appreciate." "Thank you, Captain Donnelly," Zoe replied with poised maturity. "And thank you for speaking up that day when it mattered most." The flight that followed was deliberately ordinary, a standard journey from Los Angeles to Atlanta with normal service and operations. The routine nature of the experience was itself meaningful proof that excellence and equity could become standard practice rather than exceptional response. As the aircraft began its descent toward Atlanta, Zoe gazed out the window at the city lights below. This time, rather than apprehension or trauma, her expression showed peaceful reflection. She had reclaimed not just her seat, but her sense of belonging in all the spaces she chose to occupy. And that is what justice truly looks like. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that remind us how dignity and courage can transform even the most painful moments into lasting change. Share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that they belong exactly as they are in any space they rightfully claim. Together, we can create a world where everyone travels through life with the respect they deserve.